Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world tonight, drop the name of your city in the comments below. I read every single one, and it means everything to know how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button, stay with me until the very end, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that only happens once in a lifetime. A billionaire one signature away from losing everything, a predator smiling across the table, and a quiet waitress nobody noticed, holding the only piece of math that could save them all. Stay with me. You won't want to miss a single second of this. The rain hit the windows of the Sterling room like somebody was throwing handfuls of gravel at the glass. Clara Bennett heard it before she saw it. She was crouched behind the service bar, counting wine glasses by feel because the dishwasher had fogged her glasses again, and she didn't want to take them off in front of the members. Members noticed things like that. Members noticed everything except the people who served them. Bennett, you with us? That was Donovan, the floor manager, snapping his fingers near her ear the way you'd snap at a dog that had wandered too close to the dinner table. Clara straightened up so fast she almost cracked her skull on the underside of the bar. The glass in her hand, a Rydell Bordeaux, the kind that cost more than her weekly grocery budget, wobbled. She caught it, barely. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Table 4. Private booking. 2 gentlemen. Mr. Whitmore is the host. Donovan paused, and his voice did that thing it did when he wanted her to understand something without him actually having to say it. Mr. Whitmore tips well. Mr. Whitmore also does not like to be interrupted. Are we clear, Bennett? Crystal. And for the love of everything, do not try to make conversation. Pour, smile, walk away. She nodded. He was already turning his back on her. Donovan had a habit of giving instructions and leaving before you could ask questions, which had been a problem her first week. When she'd been so anxious, she'd asked him 3 times in one shift if she was doing all right. He told her very gently that if she asked him that question again, he was going to have her replaced by a girl who didn't ask. She hadn't asked since. The Sterling room was the kind of place that didn't have a sign on the door. You either knew where it was, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower above Park Avenue, or you didn't belong. The carpet was the color of old wine. The walls were paneled in some dark wood that the regulars said came from a forest in Burma, though Clara suspected it was just oak that had been stained to look more impressive. There were no televisions. There was no music. There was a fireplace that burned real logs. Even in April, because one of the founding members had once said that gas fireplaces were for cowards and dentists. Clara had been working there for 14 months. She had not been promoted. She had not been raised. She had not, as far as she could tell, been noticed by anyone. That was more or less exactly how she wanted it. She took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her black apron, and pushed through the swinging door with the bottle of Chateau Margaux balanced on her tray. Table 4 was tucked into the far corner under one of those green banker's lamps that put a perfect circle of light on the white linen and left everything else in a kind of churchy gloom. 2 men. The first one she recognized from the magazines. Evan Whitmore. 32 years old, jaw like somebody had carved it on purpose, hair that had been cut by a person who charged real money. He was the kind of man who, if you saw him on the street, you'd assume he was an actor, and then you'd be vaguely embarrassed when somebody told you he was richer than most actors would ever be. The other man Clara had never seen in the flesh, but she knew his name the moment she saw the way he was sitting. Marcus Vale. He sat the way a cat sits when it's deciding whether the bird in the yard is worth the walk. Relaxed, patient, hungry. He was older than Whitmore, 50, maybe 55, with silver at his temples and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than the building she lived in. There was a glass of bourbon already in front of him. He had not waited for the host to offer it. Between them, on the table, was a closed silver laptop and a leather portfolio. "Good evening, gentlemen," Clara said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. She cleared her throat. "May I—" "The wine. For the table." Evan looked up at her. His eyes were a strange color, somewhere between gray and green, and there was a tiredness in them that Clara recognized immediately, because it was the same tiredness she sometimes caught in her own reflection at 4 in the morning when her father woke up confused and she had to remind him where he was. "Thank you," Evan said. He gave her a small, real smile. "That'd be great." Marcus didn't look at her at all. She poured the way she'd been trained, label facing the host, 2 fingers from the bottom of the glass, wrist turn at the end so the drop wouldn't run down the bottle. Donovan had drilled all of it into her in her first week, and she'd been so afraid of getting it wrong that she'd practiced at home with a bottle of grape juice for 2 months. "Are we doing this, or are we going to admire the wine all night, Whitmore?" That was Marcus. His voice was lower than she'd expected. There was something pleasant in it, on the surface, the way a pleasant smell sometimes hangs over something rotting in the back of a fridge. Evan picked up his glass, swirled it once, did not drink. "I told you, I'm reading every page. You've had the documents for 3 weeks. I've had the documents for 11 days, Marcus. 11 days is a lifetime in this market. 11 days is also a lifetime to my legal team, who I notice you didn't invite." "I invited you to dinner. I didn't invite a committee." Clara had finished pouring. She was supposed to walk away now. Donovan had been very specific. Pour, smile, walk away. She took 1 step backward, then another. "Miss?" She stopped. Her stomach dropped about 3 inches. It was Evan. He was looking at her. "Could we have a pitcher of water, too? Still, no ice. Sorry. Should have asked when you came over." "Of course," she said. "Of course, Yes. Right away." She turned and walked, not too fast, not too slow, back through the swinging door and into the kitchen, where she leaned against the steel counter for 1 second and let out the breath she'd been holding since she'd seen Marcus Vale's wristwatch. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know why. That wasn't true. She knew why. She'd seen the cover of the leather portfolio. It said, in small embossed letters at the bottom corner, "Vale Strategic, Project Northbridge." And in the brief second it had been visible to her, she had read the subtitle, "Recapitalization Term Sheet, Whitmore Freight Holdings." Clara Bennett set down her tray very carefully and put both of her hands flat on the steel counter to keep them from trembling. She knew what a recapitalization term sheet was. She knew, in fact, more about recapitalization term sheets than any of the 11 men who would touch this deal before it closed. The trouble was, she had spent the last 3 years of her life making sure no one in this building knew that. Her father had been a forklift driver for 31 years. That was the thing that nobody understood when they looked at Clara Bennett, with her cheap glasses and her hair pulled back into a bun and her habit of speaking just slightly too quietly to be heard the first time. They saw a girl who carried bottles of wine to rich men. They didn't see a girl who, at the age of 9, used to sit at the kitchen table with her father after his shift and explain to him, in the voice of a child who doesn't yet know that being smart is dangerous, why the interest rate on his second mortgage was going to bankrupt him. He hadn't listened. He'd loved her, but he hadn't listened. Fathers don't listen to 9-year-olds about interest rates. By the time he'd listened, she'd been 26. By the time he'd listened, his pension had been gone, his savings had been gone, the house had been gone, and he had been sitting on a folding chair in a courtroom in Newark, New Jersey, watching a man in a Navy suit explain to a judge that what had been done to him was, technically, legal. The man in the Navy suit had not been Marcus Vale, but the man in the Navy suit had worked for Marcus Vale. Clara had not known that at the time. She had only known that her father had come home from court that day and sat down on the couch and not stood up again for 3 days. He had not cried. Her father did not cry. He had only said, over and over, in a voice that was much smaller than the voice she remembered from her childhood, "I should have listened to you, sweetheart. I should have listened." She had quit her PhD program 2 months later. The story she told people was that her mother had gotten sick, which was true, and that she'd needed to come home to take care of things, which was also true. The story she did not tell anyone was that she had walked into her advisor's office at the University of Chicago, sat down across from a man who had once told her she had the cleanest analytical mind he'd seen in a decade, and said, "I don't want to do this anymore." He'd asked her why. She'd said, "Because the people who are good at what I'm good at, they hurt people, and I'm scared that if I get good enough, I'll be one of them." He'd told her she was being dramatic. Maybe she had been. She'd come home anyway. Now in the kitchen of the Sterling room, Clara picked up a glass pitcher and held it under the filtered tap and watched the water rise and tried to make her hands stop shaking. She told herself, pour the water, walk it out there, set it on the table, walk away. It is not your problem. It is not your father. He is not at that table. She told herself, Marcus Vale is one man. He has done this to 1,000 people. You cannot save all of them. You could not even save the one who mattered most. She told herself, Donovan will fire you. That last one almost worked. She'd been almost out the door, pitcher in one hand, the swinging kitchen door propped open with her hip, when she heard it. Through the gap in the door, Marcus's voice, smooth as butter on a hot pan. The structure is conservative. We've stress-tested it against 3 downside scenarios. The model holds in all of them. And she stopped, because she had heard in that moment something in the cadence of his voice that she had heard once before, in a courtroom in Newark, when a man in a Navy suit had said almost exactly the same words. The structure is conservative. We've stress-tested it. She set the pitcher on the counter, very slowly, very carefully. Then she walked back out onto the floor. The 2 men were leaning over the laptop now. Marcus had it turned toward Evan. There was a spreadsheet on the screen, and even from 6 feet away, even through the gloom of the banker's lamp, Clara could see the shape of it. 3 columns of projections, a series of waterfall charts at the bottom. The numbers were in green. She set the pitcher down on the table. Marcus did not look at her. Evan said, "Thanks?" And then, to Marcus, "Walk me through the debt service one more time." "Of course." Marcus tapped a key. The screen shifted. Senior tranche is rated investment grade. Coverage ratio is 2.8. We've structured a 5-year balloon, but with the cash flow from the Midwest depots alone, you could service it in 3. The mezzanine layer, Clara did not move. She knew she was supposed to move. Donovan was probably watching from the host stand. Donovan had eyes in the back of his head when it came to waitstaff lingering at tables. Pour, smile, walk away. That was the rule. That had always been the rule. But she couldn't stop looking at the screen, because the columns were wrong. Not wrong in a way that would be obvious to a casual observer. Wrong in the way that a key signature is wrong. In a piece of music. Wrong in the way that you don't hear it first, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The waterfall charts at the bottom were showing recovery values that assumed a freight market correlation of, 0.3? 0.4? She couldn't see the cell formulas, but she could see the shape of the answer, and the shape of the answer was wrong, because freight didn't move at 0.3 to consumer credit. It moved at 0.8, maybe 0.9 in a downturn. Everybody who had been awake during the 2008 freight collapse knew that, everybody. She blinked. Either Marcus Vail didn't know that, which was impossible because Marcus Vail had made his name in distressed logistics, or he was hiding it. She felt the blood drain out of her face. "Miss," Marcus had finally looked at her. His voice was no longer pleasant. "Was there something else?" No." Her voice was a whisper. Sorry. She started to back away. "Actually," Marcus said, "tell your manager we'll be needing privacy for the next 40 minutes. No interruptions." "Yes, sir." "And another bourbon. Not Maker's, the one I had before." "Of course, sir." She turned. She walked. She made it 5 steps before her chest started doing the thing it sometimes did when she was about to have a panic attack, that hummingbird feeling, like her ribs were too small for her heart. Walk away. Walk away. Walk away. "He is not your father." Walk away. She made it back to the kitchen. She set the pitcher down. Wait, she'd already taken the pitcher out. She was holding nothing. Her hands had been holding nothing the whole way back. She put both hands on the steel counter again. She closed her eyes. She thought about her father. She thought about the way he had sat on the couch for 3 days. She thought about the cracked vinyl of the chair she was sitting on right now, in her parents' kitchen, 6 years ago, when he'd come home from court and not stood up. She thought about the 3,000 workers at Whitmore Freight Holdings. She didn't know how many there were exactly. She had read it once, in a Wall Street Journal article she'd been reading in the break room. 3,000 and change, 3,000 pensions, 3,000 mortgages, 3,000 families who had no idea that a man at table 4 was about to sign their lives away because he was tired, and he hadn't slept, and his lawyers weren't there, and the numbers were green. Numbers were green when somebody wanted them to be green. She opened her eyes. "Bennett," Donovan, behind her. "Why did you stand at table 4 for 40 seconds? I'm sorry, Mr. Vale just complained. He says you were staring at his computer. I wasn't staring. I was waiting to see if they needed anything else. Bennett. Donovan stepped closer. He had a way of stepping closer that didn't feel threatening, exactly, but that left no question about what was being communicated. Mr. Vale is a personal guest of the chairman. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes. You will not return to that table. Marisol will take it for the rest of the evening. You will work the bar service. You will not, under any circumstances, speak to either of those men again. Are we clear? Yes. Bennett? Look at me. She looked at him. Are we clear? Yes, Donovan. He held her eyes for one more second, and then he turned and walked away. Clara stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Through the swinging door she could hear, very faintly, the murmur of the room, the clink of silverware, somebody laughing at something, the low rumble of Marcus Vale's voice, explaining. She thought, I can't. She thought, I can't say anything. I'll lose the job. Dad's medication is $600 a month, and my insurance covers $400 of it. If I lose this job, we lose his medication. If we lose his medication, he forgets where he is. If he forgets where he is, he wanders. Last time he wandered, he ended up at the Bayonne Bridge at 2 in the morning, and a cop named Officer Reyes called me. And Officer Reyes was very kind, and Officer Reyes said next time I should put a tag on him. A tag. On my father. She thought, I can't. And then she thought, I have to. She thought it very quietly. She thought it the way her father used to say things on the couch, in those 3 days, when his voice had been smaller than she'd remembered. She thought it once more, just to be sure. I have to. She had a notebook. It was a small black moleskin, the cheap kind, not the expensive kind. She kept it in the inside pocket of her apron. She used it for table numbers mostly, specials, allergies. No shellfish at 6, no dairy at 9, that kind of thing. In the back of it, in handwriting so small it looked almost typed, she had been keeping a different kind of list. She had started keeping it about 8 months into the job. After the 3rd or 4th time, she'd overheard a conversation at table 4 or table 7 that had made her go home and sit on her bed with her laptop and check the math just because she couldn't sleep. The list was just for her. She had never shown it to anyone. She had never planned to show it to anyone. It was a list of every single time in 14 months that she had heard a deal at the Sterling Room that she was certain was going to fall apart. There were 11 entries. 2 of them had already collapsed publicly. A third had collapsed quietly, without making the papers, but she'd seen the bankruptcy filing on the court website. A 4th, well, the 4th one she didn't write about because the 4th one had ended with a man jumping off the roof of his office building in Hartford, and she had cried about it for a week. And she had not added a 5th entry for almost 2 months after that, because she had not wanted, in any way, to feel responsible for what she had heard and not said. 11 entries. Number 12 was sitting at table 4 right now, reaching for a pen. She walked out of the kitchen. She did not walk to the bar. She walked instead around the long way behind the row of high-backed leather chairs by the fireplace, until she came out on the far side of the room near the window. Then she turned and she walked toward table 4. Donovan saw her halfway across the room. His face did a thing she had never seen it do before. It was a sort of slow comprehension, the way somebody's face changes when they realize the noise they're hearing isn't a passing siren, but a fire alarm. He started to walk toward her. She walked faster. Bennett? She reached the table. Evan Whitmore had a black Mont Blanc pen in his right hand. The leather portfolio was open in front of him. The signature page was on top. He had not signed yet. He was, in fact, holding the pen poised about 2 inches above the paper, the way a person holds a pen when they're about to sign something, but they aren't quite sure why they're hesitating. Marcus saw her first. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, we asked for privacy." "I know," Clara said. Her voice was so quiet she barely heard it herself. She tried again. "I know, I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I need to tell you something." "Bennett." Donovan was right behind her now. His hand closed around her elbow, gentle but firm. "Bennett, come with me, right now." "Mr. Whitmore." She didn't pull away from Donovan. She looked at Evan. "Don't sign that." The room went quiet. Not the whole room. The room was too big to go quiet all at once. But the part of the room around table 4, the 4 other tables within earshot, the man at the bar, the bartender polishing a glass, all of them stopped what they were doing. Marcus Vale laughed. It was a short laugh, more a cough than a laugh, and there was nothing in it that was warm. "Whitmore, I think your waitress has been into the Margot." "I haven't been drinking," Clara said. "Honey," Marcus turned to her. His voice was gentle now, the way the voice in the courtroom in Newark had been gentle when it had been explaining to her father that what had happened to him was, technically, legal. "Honey, I don't know what you think you saw on my screen, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and I promise you—" "The waterfall on the secondary tranche," Clara said. Marcus stopped. "The waterfall on the secondary tranche," she said again. "It's modeling correlation at— I couldn't see the cell, but it has to be around 0.3, 0.4, based on the recovery values. Freight doesn't correlate at 0.3 to consumer credit. It correlates at 0.8. In a downturn, 0.9. That's not a stress test. That's a fairy tale." There was a silence. It was not a long silence, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. But Clara, in the middle of it, became aware that Evan Whitmore had set his pen down on the table. He had set it down very carefully, the way you set down a match when you've just realized you're standing in a room full of gasoline. "Donovan," Evan said. He did not look at Donovan. He was looking at Clara. "Could you give us a minute, please?" "Mr. Whitmore, I am so sorry. She's not authorized to—" "Donovan, a minute, please." Donovan let go of her elbow. He stepped back. He did not, Clara noticed, leave. He just stepped back 2 paces and stood there with his hands clasped in front of him the way the maitre d' at a restaurant stands when he is pretending not to listen. Marcus Vale was staring at Clara. The pleasant thing in his voice was gone. The patient thing was gone. The hungry thing was still there, but it had changed shape. It had become, she realized, a sort of cold attention, the way a cat's attention changes when the bird in the yard turns out to be larger than expected. "I don't know who you are," Marcus said softly. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said. "I'm a waitress." "You're a waitress?" "Yes." "And you read recapitalization models in your spare time?" Yes, sort of. I used to." Marcus smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Whitmore, you can't be taking this seriously." The girl saw a screen for 30 seconds, from 6 feet away, with— he gestured at her— "I'm sorry, but with glasses that are visibly fogged." "Mr. Vale," Clara said. He looked at her. She had been afraid, all her life, of moments exactly like this one. She had been afraid of them at the kitchen table when she was 9. She had been afraid of them in her advisor's office at Chicago. She had been afraid of them every single day since her father had come home from a courtroom in Newark and not stood up from the couch for 3 days. She was afraid of this one, too. But there was a thing she had figured out somewhere in the last few minutes, and the thing was this. She had already lost her job. The instant she'd opened her mouth, she had already lost her job. Donovan would fire her tonight. There was no walking that back. The worst thing that could happen to her professionally had already happened. So the only question that was left was whether, on the way out, she was going to take Marcus Vale with her. "Mr. Vale," she said again, and her voice was a little stronger this time. "I don't need to see your model for 30 seconds. I'd like to see it for 1 minute. May I?" "Absolutely not." "Mr. Whitmore?" She turned to Evan. Evan Whitmore had not moved. He was still sitting in the same position, his hand near the pen but no longer holding it, his face very still in the green light of the banker's lamp. He looked at her. He looked at her for what felt to Clara like a very long time. She did not know what he saw. She knew what he probably saw. A woman of 30, in a black apron, with cheap glasses and her hair pulled back too tight, standing in the middle of a private club where she did not belong, telling him a thing he had no reason to believe. But there was a tiredness in his eyes that she had recognized when she'd first seen him. And underneath the tiredness, there was something else. She thought it was maybe the part of him that had not slept in 11 days. "Show me," he said. Marcus made a noise. "Whitmore, show me, Marcus. This is absurd. We have a deal. We have terms. We have lawyers waiting on—" "Marcus." Evan's voice did not rise. It got quieter. It got Clara realized the way a man's voice gets when he is no longer asking. We have terms. We have not signed. There is a difference. Show her the model. There was a silence at the table. Marcus Vale, after a long moment, turned the laptop 1/4 turn toward Clara. The screen was still on the same waterfall chart. The numbers were still in green. Clara put her hand into the inner pocket of her apron, and she pulled out the small black moleskin notebook, and she set it on the corner of the white tablecloth beside the empty wine glass, and she opened it to a blank page. She took the pen from her apron, a plain Beck, the kind you got in a pack of 10 at the drugstore, and she clicked it. She did not sit down. She bent over the laptop. I'm going to need the cell formulas, she said. Her voice was steadier now, almost normal. Could you double-click on D47, please? Marcus did not move. Marcus, Evan said. Marcus very slowly reached out one finger and double-clicked on the cell. The formula came up. Clara looked at it. She looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. Then she looked up at Evan Whitmore, and her face had changed. And Evan Whitmore, who had been looking at her the whole time, and who would later say, in an interview that did not happen for another 2.5 years, that this was the moment he understood his life had just been split into a before and an after. Evan Whitmore saw it. Mr. Whitmore, Clara said, and her voice was the smallest it had been all night, and it was also, at the same time, the clearest. If you sign this contract tonight, I think your company is going to default within 5 years. I think the default probability is somewhere between 60 and 80%. I think the senior tranche is going to wipe out your equity, and I think the pension fund is going to be the second creditor in line, and I think a lot of workers, Mr. Whitmore, I think they're going to lose everything. She paused. She looked at the cell formula on the screen one more time, just to be sure. And I think, she said, that Mr. Vale knows. Marcus Vale stood up. He stood up so fast his chair scraped backward across the carpet, and the bourbon glass on the table jumped, and the bourbon, what was left of it, sloshed against the side of the glass and almost spilled. His face, in the green light of the banker's lamp, had gone the color of old chalk. He opened his mouth to say something. He closed it again. And in the silence of that long, terrible second, while the rain hit the windows of the Sterling room like somebody throwing handfuls of gravel at the glass, Evan Whitmore reached out very slowly, and he picked up his Mont Blanc pen, and he capped it, and he set it back down on the leather portfolio. He did not sign. He looked up at Clara Bennett, the waitress with the fogged glasses and the small black notebook, and he said very quietly, "Sit down, Miss Bennett." Mr. Whitmore, I really shouldn't, please." She looked at Donovan. Donovan's face had gone through about 4 different colors in the last 90 seconds, and it had now settled on a kind of waxy pale that suggested he was no longer entirely sure what was happening in his own dining room. "Sit down, Bennett," Donovan said hoarsely. Clara Bennett, 30 years old, who had not raised her voice in a public place since she was 19, pulled out the empty chair at table 4, and she sat down. She set her notebook on the white linen. She opened it to a blank page. And outside, on Park Avenue, 42 floors below, the rain kept coming down, and a doorman in a long coat held an umbrella over the heads of strangers. And somewhere in a small apartment in Bayonne, a man named Walter Bennett was sitting in a chair by a window, watching the rain, and trying very hard to remember the name of his daughter. The chair felt wrong under her. It was the same chair that members of the Sterling room sat in every night. The same dark leather, the same solid weight, the same height off the floor. But from this side of the table, everything looked different. The ceiling seemed higher. The green light from the banker's lamp felt more intense, more focused, like being under an examination light rather than a dining light. Clara could see the grain of the white linen tablecloth in a way she never had from a standing position. She could see the small initials embossed at the corner. She could see the faint ring left by Marcus Vale's bourbon glass. She was very aware that she was still wearing her apron. "Miss Bennett?" Evan had his hands folded on the table. His voice was even, measured, the voice of a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, to slow down when everything around him was speeding up. "Tell me your name, your full name." "Clara. Clara Bennett." "How long have you worked here?" 14 months. "And before this?" She hesitated. Before this, she said carefully, I was in graduate school. Evan's expression didn't change exactly, but something in it shifted, like a lens coming very slightly into focus. Where? University of Chicago. Economics. I was working on my dissertation. On what? Debt market contagion, specifically correlation modeling and leveraged loan structures. She paused. Which is why I noticed the formula. At the other end of the table, Marcus Vail had not sat back down. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at Clara the way a person looks at a dog that has just done something unexpected. Not anger, quite. Not yet. Something more clinical than anger. This is fascinating, Marcus said, and his voice was back to being pleasant. Truly. The Sterling Room has the most educated waitstaff in Manhattan. Whitmore, do you realize what you're paying in tips here? He made a small gesture with one hand. Can we be adults about this? Miss Bennett, I understand you feel strongly. I understand you looked at a screen for 30 seconds and arrived at a conclusion. But I have 30 years of the freight-to-consumer credit correlation, Clara said. In your model, what value are you using? A pause. That's proprietary information. It's in the formula, D47, the cell you just opened. I know what cell I opened. Then you know what the value is. Silence. Marcus Vail was not the kind of man who walked into silences. He was the kind of man who filled them. He had, in 30 years of doing exactly what he was doing at this table tonight, never once sat in a silence that he had not chosen. He sat in this one for almost 4 seconds. 4 seconds, Clara had learned, was a very long time at a negotiating table. 0.35, Marcus said finally. Evan turned to look at him. He said nothing. He just turned and looked. It's a conservative model, Marcus said, and now there was something tight in his voice that had not been there before, something wound, like a spring. Conservative means lower correlation. Lower correlation means the senior tranche is better insulated from… Conservative is higher, Clara said quietly. Excuse me? Conservative, in a stress model, means you assume the worst case. Higher correlation is the worst case. Lower correlation is the optimistic case. She opened her notebook. Not because she needed to write anything, just because having it open made her feel like she was standing on ground she recognized. 0.35 is not conservative, it assumes that freight markets behave like a separate economy from consumer credit. And they don't. In 2008, when consumer credit seized, freight volumes dropped 22% in 4 months. The correlation was 0.86. I checked. That was 2008. In 2015, when the oil sector contracted, freight dropped 14% in 2 months. Correlation was 0.79. She looked at him steadily. Do you want me to keep going? Another silence. This one was shorter. 3 seconds, maybe. But it had a different quality than the last one. The last silence had been Marcus calculating. This one felt, to Clara, like something else. Like the moment between putting your foot on a step and realizing the step isn't there. Evan Whitmore picked up his pen. Not to sign. He turned it over in his fingers once, twice, the way people turn things over when they need something to do with their hands while their brain does the real work. What's the actual number? He said. If you model it correctly, what does the default risk look like? Clara looked at the screen. She looked at it for a moment, doing the math the way she'd always done it. The way that felt less like calculation and more like reading. The numbers arranging themselves into a shape, a story, the story they were always telling if you knew the language. I'd need to run the full model, she said, but based on the recovery assumptions and the balloon structure, I'd estimate somewhere between 68 and 78% default probability within 60 months. The sound Evan made was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when they've been told something they'd suspected but hadn't wanted to be true. Whitmore. Marcus's voice had dropped now. The pleasantness was entirely gone. He was speaking directly to Evan, as if Clara were no longer in the room. I need you to think carefully about what's happening here. You have a waitress, a graduate school dropout, who glanced at a proprietary model for 30 seconds and is now making claims that, if they were in any way credible, would have been caught by your legal team, your financial advisors, your bankers, and my own risk team, all of whom have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing every page of this document. Are we seriously doing this? She's not wrong about the correlation, Evan said. Marcus stopped. I know she's not wrong about the correlation, Evan said. He was still turning the pen over in his fingers. I flagged it 3 weeks ago. My advisor said the model was industry standard. It is industry standard. An industry standard model that predicts a 74% default rate is not conservative, Marcus. It's a weapon. Clara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, because that word, weapon, was not the word of a man who was processing new information. That was the word of a man who had already processed it, somewhere in the back of his mind, in the 11 days he'd been sitting with the document, and who had been waiting for something to give him the permission to say it out loud. Marcus pulled out his chair and sat down. He set his forearms on the table. He looked at Evan with the kind of directness that Clara associated with men who had learned very early that most people would back down from eye contact if you held it long enough. I'm going to say this once, Marcus said. We had an agreement. We shook on it. The terms were settled. Your own team signed off on the due diligence. My team signed off on a model that may have been deliberately misspecified. May have been. Give me the laptop. Evan, give me the laptop, Marcus. Another silence. Longer this time, long enough that somewhere across the room, someone set down a fork, and the sound of it hitting the plate was very clear. Marcus pushed the laptop across the table. Evan looked at Clara. Can you run it? He said. The corrected model, right now. She looked at the screen. It was a complex workbook, multi-tab, deeply nested formulas, the kind of thing that took weeks to build and hours to understand. She had run models like this in grad school. She had not run one in 3 years. She had not, in 3 years, so much as opened a financial modeling software outside of the tax program she used for her father's disability paperwork. I'll need to get into the cell inputs, she said, and the macro layer. Is it protected? Marcus said nothing. Marcus, Evan said. The password, Marcus said, very slowly, very distinctly, is confidential. Marcus, the password. Something happened in Marcus Vale's face. Something that Clara would think about later, at home, sitting on her bed at 2 a.m, trying to understand what she had witnessed. His face, in that moment, did not look angry. It did not look afraid. It looked, briefly, like the face of a man who has just been told the rules of a game he thought he was winning have changed, and who has not yet decided whether to keep playing. Summit 2019, Marcus said, capital S. Clara turned the laptop toward herself. Her hands were shaking again. She noticed, and she made a deliberate choice to type anyway, which she had learned in 14 months of carrying expensive glassware through crowded rooms, was the only available response to shaking hands. She got through the password. The macro layer opened. She found the correlation input table in under 2 minutes, because the architecture of the model was, she realized with a sinking feeling, almost identical to a model type she had studied extensively. A leveraged loan waterfall structure popularized by a particular investment bank in the mid-2000s. She had written 40 pages about this exact structure, about the way it concealed risk in the correlation layer by disguising optimistic inputs as industry standard. She had written those 40 pages as a graduate student at the University of Chicago, for a class taught by a professor named Martin Gould. Martin Gould, who had later left academia to consult for 3 of the largest investment banks in New York. Martin Gould, who had, according to a Financial Times piece she'd read in the break room 8 months ago, recently been named a senior advisor to Vale's strategic capital. She sat with that information for exactly 2 seconds. Then she changed the correlation input from 0.35 to 0.82, which was the 10-year average for freight-to-consumer credit correlation she had memorized, not because she'd planned to use it tonight, but because certain numbers lodged themselves in her brain and refused to leave. She hit recalculate. The model took about 6 seconds to run. The waterfall charts changed color, green to yellow 2, in 2 of the tranches, red. The default probability figure appeared in a box in the upper right corner of the summary tab. It said 74.3%. The room, at least the small circle of it that surrounded table 4, did not move. Evan Whitmore leaned forward. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he leaned back. He placed both of his hands flat on the table, very deliberately, the way a person places their hands when they want to make sure they don't do something with them. Marcus, he said. The inputs can be debated, Marcus said. His voice was controlled, but it was controlled the way a person controls a car on an icy road, with a tremendous amount of attention going to the task of keeping it from going sideways. Any financial model is sensitive to a Marcus. Evan's voice was quiet, completely quiet. How many pension funds are in the secondary tranche? A pause. That's a matter of the fund allocation structure, which is, how many pension funds, Marcus? Another pause. 4, Marcus said. Clara thought about her father sitting on the couch. She thought about him sitting there for 3 days, not speaking, in a way that was worse than crying because it was so much quieter than crying. 4 pension funds, Evan said, and a 74% chance they're going to be second in line when this collapses. Behind the senior tranche, which you hold. This is not. You hold the senior tranche. Your firm holds it. The pension funds, the ones with the teachers, the municipal workers, whatever, they're in the mezzanine. And when the balloon comes due and the cash flow doesn't cover it, which according to this model will happen with near certainty, the senior tranche gets paid first, which is you. And the mezzanine gets whatever's left. Evan paused. Which is nothing. I did not design the tranche structure, Whitmore. The structure was, you designed the model that hid the risk. I designed nothing. Marcus's voice cracked, very slightly, on the word nothing. It was the first crack. The first real one. I presented a model prepared by my analysts, reviewed by Martin Gould, Clara said. Both men looked at her. She hadn't planned to say it. It had come out the way things come out when you've been sitting on them for a moment too long, and your mouth makes the decision before your brain can stop it. But she'd said it, so she kept going. Martin Gould consulted on this structure. I recognized the architecture. He used a very similar framework in a series of structured products between 2014 and 2017. She swallowed. One of which was used to recapitalize a pension fund in Newark, New Jersey, that subsequently went into default. She did not say, and one of the workers whose pension was in that fund was my father. She did not say it because it was too much, and also because she was afraid that if she said it, Marcus would use it against her somehow. He was the kind of man who could find the angle in anything. She just looked at the screen instead. 74.3%. There was a very long silence. I think, Evan said, we're done for tonight. Whitmore. Marcus had leaned forward now. The smoothness was gone from his face. The patience was gone. What was left underneath it was something older and less kind. If you walk away from this deal, I'm not walking away from anything. You are. You're taking this term sheet, and you're taking your model, and you're getting out of my building. Your building. Marcus's jaw tightened. May I remind you that I own 11% of your company. You own 11% of my company, Evan said steadily. And that's going to be a problem, I agree. But it is a significantly smaller problem than the one on this screen. He turned the laptop around so it was facing Marcus again, so that the 74.3% was pointed directly at him. I'll have my lawyers call your lawyers. Good night. Marcus Vale stood. He straightened his jacket. He buttoned one button, then the other, slowly, precisely, the way a man buttons his jacket when he is working very hard to look like the kind of person who buttons his jacket slowly and precisely. He picked up his leather portfolio. He closed the silver laptop and tucked it under his arm. He did not look at Clara. You're going to regret this, he said to Evan. Just that. Nothing else. Evan said nothing back. Marcus walked across the carpet, that burgundy carpet the color of old wine, and he walked past the fireplace with the real logs, and he walked past the bar, and he pushed through the glass door at the far end of the room, and he was gone. The room took about 3 seconds to go back to normal. Silverware clinked. A woman at table 2 said something to her companion and laughed. The bartender went back to polishing his glass. The Sterling room absorbed the departure of Marcus Vale the way it absorbed most things, without comment, without visible interest, with the long practiced discretion of an institution that had seen stranger things than a deal falling through. Donovan appeared at Clara's elbow. Bennett, he said. His voice was for the first time completely without its professional texture. He sounded tired. I need you to come with me. I know, she said. Right now. I know, Donovan. Miss Bennett. Evan's voice from across the table. She looked at him. He was looking at her with that same steady gray-green tiredness, but there was something else in it now. Something she hadn't seen when she'd first come to the table with the Margot and the shaking hands. She couldn't quite name it. Recognition, maybe. The look a person gets when they see something familiar in a place they didn't expect it. Would you? I'm sorry, I don't want to make your night worse than it apparently already is. But would you be willing to write down the formula correction? What you changed, so I can explain it to my team tomorrow. She opened her moleskin to a fresh page. She wrote it down. The input, the historical data, the source. Her handwriting, which was extremely small and extremely even, the handwriting of someone who had taken a lot of notes in very small spaces, filled a quarter of the page in about 45 seconds. She tore the page out and set it on the linen next to his wine glass. Thank you, Evan said. He picked it up and looked at it for a moment, then folded it once and put it in the breast pocket of his jacket. And I mean this seriously. Thank you. For the other thing. She nodded. She couldn't quite make words come out. She stood up from the chair at table 4, the chair that members sat in, the chair she was not supposed to sit in, and she followed Donovan through the swinging door and into the kitchen. Donovan did not speak until the door had closed fully behind them. Then he put his hands on his hips and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he looked at her. Bennett, he said. I know. What in the... He stopped, started again. What were you thinking? I was thinking the deal was going to hurt people. You were thinking... Bennett. Bennett, do you understand what you just did in my dining room, in front of a guest of the chairman? Do you understand that Marcus Vail is going to call that man tomorrow morning and you are going to be done in this industry? Do you understand that I am supposed to fire you right now, tonight, and that if I don't fire you right now, tonight, I'm going to have a problem with the chairman too? I understand, she said. Do you? She looked at him. She thought about saying, I understand that I don't have another option. I understand that my father's medication is $600 a month and my insurance covers $400. I understand that I have $19 in my checking account and a broken dishwasher and a neighbor who sometimes watches my dad for free, but who has made it very clear that she is doing it out of kindness and not obligation. She thought about saying all of that. She said, yes, I understand. Donovan looked at her for a long, complicated moment. He was not a cruel man. Clara had always known that about him, even when he was snapping his fingers near her ear. He was a man who had built his professional identity on a very precise set of rules, and he lived inside those rules the way some people live inside a religion. Not because the rules were sacred, but because the rules were safe. Because a world in which the rules applied consistently was a world in which Donovan knew what to do. Clara had just broken the rules in a very public way. He looked at the floor, he looked at the ceiling again, he said, Go clock out, come back in tomorrow for your things. She nodded. Bennett? She stopped. For what it's worth, Donovan said, and his voice had gone quiet, the way it went quiet when he was not being the floor manager and was just being a person. I don't think you were wrong. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded again and went to clock out. The ride home was a local train, the kind that stops at every platform and takes 45 minutes to go a distance that a car would cover in 20. Clara sat in a plastic seat near the door. The car smelled like old coffee and someone's takeout, and the particular metallic cold of a late April night seeping in through the gaps around the doors. There were 4 other people in the car. None of them looked at her. She sat with her hands in her lap and her small black notebook balanced on her knee, open to the page with the list. Entry 12. She did not write anything next to it. There was nothing to write yet. She didn't know how it ended. She didn't know if what she'd done had actually helped or had simply delayed something inevitable by one evening, given Marcus enough time to find a different angle or a different signature. She thought about what Marcus had said before he left. You're going to regret this. Not to her, to Evan. But she thought, sitting in the train with the smell of old coffee and the light flickering once, twice, at the 23rd Street stop, that it had also been, in some way, meant for her. The train pulled into the Bayonne stop at 11:42. Clara walked 3 blocks in the rain without an umbrella because she had left her umbrella at work 3 weeks ago and had never remembered to bring a new one. By the time she reached the apartment building, a 4-story brick building on the corner of a street that was mostly auto repair shops and a laundromat. Her jacket was soaked through and her glasses were worse than they'd been at the Sterling room. She let herself in. The hallway smelled like cooking and laundry detergent. The elevator was broken, which it frequently was, so she took the stairs to the 3rd floor and stood outside apartment 3C for a moment, key in hand, listening. From inside, she could hear the television, which was a good sign. When the television was on, it usually meant he was awake and oriented and not sitting in the dark in the chair by the window. She let herself in. The living room was small, and the furniture in it was the kind of furniture that had once been somebody's good furniture and had now been just furniture for long enough that the distinction no longer mattered. Her father was on the couch in his good cardigan, the green one, the one her mother had given him the last Christmas before she'd gotten sick, watching a nature documentary about something in the ocean. "Hey, Dad." "Sweetheart." Walter Bennett looked up. His face, when he saw her, did what it always did. It opened, like a window being lifted. He was 61 years old, and he looked, depending on the day, somewhere between 55 and 70. Tonight was a good night. Tonight he looked like himself. "You're soaking wet." "I forgot my umbrella." "You always forget your umbrella." "I know." "Your mother used to pin a note to your backpack that said umbrella. Every single day. You still forgot it." "I know, Dad." "Sit down. There's soup on the stove. I made soup." She stopped in the doorway. "You made soup?" "Don't sound so surprised. I can make soup. I've been making soup since before you were born." "You're not supposed to use the stove when I'm not—" "Clara Marie Bennett, I have been using a stove for 40 years. She pressed her lips together. She had, 8 months ago, had a conversation with his doctor about the stove, and the doctor had said, carefully, that it depended on the day, on how he was doing, and that she should use her judgment, and her judgment, most of the time, was no stove. But tonight was a good night, and the soup smelled like the soup he used to make when she was little, which was a very simple vegetable soup that he made from memory, and that was, if she was being completely honest, better than anything she'd learned to cook herself. She hung up her wet jacket on the hook by the door. She went to the kitchen and got a bowl and served herself from the pot, which was still warm, and she came back and sat in the armchair across from her father, with her feet tucked underneath her. "Hard night?" he said, looking at her over the documentary. "Little bit." "You want to talk about it?" She looked at the soup. It was very good. She was also very tired. I told a man something he didn't want to hear tonight." "What kind of man?" "An important one." Her father was quiet for a moment. On the TV, something very large and very beautiful moved through the dark water. "The right kind?" he said. She looked up. "Was it the right thing to tell him?" he said. His voice was gentle. This was one of the things about good nights. On good nights, her father was not the man who had not stood up from the couch for 3 days. He was the man who had taken her to the library every Saturday when she was a child and let her stay until they closed. He was the man who had said, once, when she was maybe 12, and had been afraid to raise her hand in class, "Clara, if you know the answer, you say so. That's what knowing is for." "Yeah," she said, "I think it was the right thing." "Then that's what matters." He patted her knee once, the way fathers pat their children's knees. "Eat your soup." She ate her soup. The documentary moved on. Something else moved through the dark water, smaller than the first thing, faster. Her father fell asleep on the couch about halfway through the next segment, the way he sometimes did, quick and without ceremony, like a light being turned off. Clara got up and turned off the television and put a blanket over him. She stood there for a moment in the quiet apartment, with the rain still going at the window and the soup warm in her stomach, and she thought about the way Evan Whitmore had looked at her when he'd said, "Please." She thought about Marcus Vail buttoning his jacket. She thought about Martin Gould's name in a newspaper article, and the particular architecture of a financial model that she had studied for 2 years, and a family losing everything in Newark. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to her room, which was small and faced the alley, and she sat down on the edge of her bed. Her phone was in her apron pocket. She had forgotten it was there. She pulled it out, and there was a notification from a number she didn't recognize. Manhattan area code. She opened it. "This is Evan Whitmore. Donovan gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I'll ask him not to do that again. I wanted to say, whatever happens with the job situation, I meant what I said. What you did tonight mattered. Thank you. E.W." She read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the nightstand. She lay down on top of the covers, still in her work clothes, and she looked at the ceiling of her small room, and she thought about all the things she was afraid of, and all the things she was not, and whether those two lists had shifted positions in the last few hours. Outside, the rain was finally stopping. She could hear it tapering off. The way rain doesn't stop all at once, but in stages, getting lighter and lighter, until the sound of it is less like rain and more like just the sound of the city breathing. She did not sleep for a long time, but for the first time in 14 months, she did not reach for the notebook. She didn't go back for her things the next morning. She meant to. She'd set an alarm for 8, planned to take the train in before the lunch service started, before Donovan had to deal with the midday rush, and could be expected to be decent about it. She'd even laid out the clothes she was going to wear, the gray cardigan, the good jeans, the shoes that didn't have a scuff on the left toe. She had a system for this kind of thing. When something was going to be hard, she prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, methodically, with a list, with the items in the correct order. The alarm went off at 8. She turned it off. She lay in the same position she'd fallen asleep in, still in her work clothes from the night before, and she looked at the water stain on the ceiling of her room that was shaped, if you squinted, like the state of Ohio. Her phone had 3 notifications. One was a reminder about her father's prescription refill. One was an email from her building super about the broken elevator. One was a reply to the text she had not sent, which meant it was a continuation of the thread from last night, from the Manhattan area code. She picked up the phone. I spoke to our general counsel this morning. The formula issue is confirmed. There are 2 additional inputs in the secondary model that were also misspecified. My team is pulling the full audit now. I don't know yet what this means legally, but I know what it means practically. I'd like to meet with you if you're willing. Not at the Sterling Room, somewhere that makes more sense. EW, she read it 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and went to make coffee. Her father was already up, which sometimes happened on good days. He'd be awake before her, moving around the kitchen with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned to compensate for the moments when his brain doesn't quite cooperate, who has built workarounds for himself the way a river builds around a new rock. He was standing at the counter when she came in, eating a piece of toast over the sink. "There's coffee," he said. I can see that, thank you. "You slept in your clothes." "I know. That's not good for the clothes." "I know, Dad." He looked at her over his toast. He had a way of looking at her that he'd had since she was small, a kind of patient attention, like he was reading something in her face that she wasn't saying out loud. It had been useful when she was young. It was occasionally irritating now. "The man you told something to last night," he said. "How'd that go?" She poured her coffee. "He texted me. The man you told something to." "Yes. That's either very good or very bad. I'm not sure yet." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "He wants to meet." Her father finished his toast. He folded the paper towel he'd been using as a plate. He always used paper towels as plates, which had driven her mother crazy for 30 years. And he set it on the counter. "You going to go?" he said. "I don't know." "What's stopping you?" She thought about that. What was stopping her was a list of things, and the list was long. And the first item on the list was that she was 30 years old and she'd been a waitress for 14 months. And before that, she'd been a graduate student who had walked out of her own future. And she wasn't sure what she was supposed to be now. And she was fairly certain that a meeting with a billionaire whose company she'd just accidentally saved was not the natural next step for someone who wasn't sure what she was supposed to be. "I don't know what I'd be walking into," she said. "You never know what you're walking into," her father said. "That's what walking is." She looked at him. He shrugged. "Your mother said that, not me." She was smarter. Clara drank her coffee. She texted back at 9:15 from the kitchen table while her father read the newspaper in the next room. "Okay. Where and when?" The response came in 4 minutes. "Today, if possible." 11. "There's a coffee place on Lexington around the corner from Grand Central. Rourke's. Do you know it?" She did not know it. She looked it up. It was the kind of coffee place that had wooden tables and no music, and the kind of pour-over coffee that took 8 minutes and cost $11. Not the Sterling Room, but not exactly neutral ground either. She texted back, "I'll be there." Then she went to shower and change, because if she was going to walk into something she didn't understand, she was at least going to do it in clean clothes. Rourke's was busier than she'd expected for a Tuesday morning. She got there 7 minutes early, which was a habit she'd never been able to break, and she stood outside for a moment looking through the window at the inside. Wood tables, exposed brick, a chalkboard menu, a line of 4 people waiting for pour-overs, a woman in the corner working on a laptop, 2 men by the window having a conversation that looked like it was about something they disagreed on, and Evan Whitmore at a table in the back with a coffee already in front of him and his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking at his phone the way people look at their phones when they're not actually reading anything on their phones. He looked different in daylight, smaller somehow. Not physically. He was still clearly the kind of person who had never in his life wondered whether he could reach the top shelf. But there was something about the context. In the Sterling room, under the banker's lamp, he had been a member. Here, with the rolled sleeves and the untouched coffee and the expression of a man who had not slept, he was just a person. She pushed open the door. He saw her immediately, stood up, which she hadn't expected, and then seemed slightly unsure what to do with himself once he was standing, which made her feel unexpectedly more comfortable. "Miss Bennett?" He put out his hand. She shook it. "Clara is fine." "Evan?" He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, can I get you something?" "I'll get it. 1 second." She ordered a regular drip coffee at the counter because $11 for a pour-over was not something she could justify, even on a day when she was meeting with a billionaire. And then she came back to the table and sat down and put her hands around the mug and looked at him. He looked like he'd been awake for most of the night. His eyes had that grit in them, that particular dullness that comes from thinking too hard for too many consecutive hours. He had the folded piece of notebook paper on the table in front of him, her handwriting, the formula correction she'd written out the night before. "I owe you an apology," he said. She blinked. "For what?" "For not catching it myself." He turned the piece of paper over in his hands. "My team flagged the correlation assumption 3 weeks ago. I asked Marcus about it. He told me his risk team had reviewed it and it was industry standard. I should have pushed harder." "You couldn't have known it was deliberate." "I should have known it was wrong." He set the paper down. "I built this company from a 2-truck operation in South Jersey. I know freight. I know what freight does in a recession. I knew on some level that 0.35 was too low. He stopped. "I was tired. I'd been negotiating with Marcus for 4 months, and I was tired of it, and I wanted it over." She didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. She recognized it, that feeling, the particular exhaustion of a thing that has gone on too long and that you want finished regardless of whether the finish is any good. "How bad is it?" she said. "The audit?" "Yes." He let out a long breath. "Bad enough. The 2 additional misspecified inputs my counsel found this morning, they're in the macro layer, not the main sheet. Hidden. You'd only find them if you were looking for them specifically, or if you knew the model type." "I knew the model type." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "Because of Martin Gould." She felt her jaw tighten. "You looked him up after your text last night." "Yes." He paused. "He consulted for Vail Strategic starting in 2019. Before that, University of Chicago. Did you study under him?" "For 2 years." "Was he—" Evan hesitated in the way people hesitate when they're trying to ask something delicate. "Was he good?" She thought about that. Martin Gould had been, in many ways, the best teacher she'd ever had. He had been rigorous in a way that most professors weren't, demanding in a way that had made her work harder than she'd ever worked. And he had been, in the years she'd studied under him, entirely and genuinely committed to the idea that mathematics could be a force for clarity in a world that preferred opacity. She had admired him. She had also, in those 2 years, watched him develop a very specific kind of impatience for anything that complicated a clean result. He didn't like messy answers. He didn't like models that said it depends, or in certain conditions. He liked elegant solutions. He liked numbers that behaved. Numbers that behaved could be made to behave in directions that weren't honest. He was brilliant, she said, and I think he convinced himself that what he was doing was just modeling, just math, that the people making decisions about the math were responsible for the decisions. She paused. I think a lot of people convince themselves of that. Evan looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. I want to hire you, he said. She had been expecting it, in the abstract way that you expect something when the conversation has been building toward it. But hearing it still did something unexpected to her, some quick rearrangement of the air in her chest. As what? She said. That's part of what I want to talk about. My risk team is good. They're good at what they normally look at. Operational risk, freight risk, counterparty exposure. What they're not good at is exactly what happened last night. Structured finance, debt architecture, the way instruments can be designed to obscure what they're actually doing. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. I have people who can tell me if a truck route is efficient. I don't have anyone who can tell me if a term sheet is a trap. You have lawyers. My lawyers told me the correlation assumption was industry standard. They're not wrong that it's used. Clara. He said her name in a way that stopped her. Not sharp, just direct. You saw it in 30 seconds, from 6 feet away, through fogged glasses. My lawyers had 3 weeks and a full set of documents. He paused. I'm not looking for a lawyer. I'm looking for someone who reads it the way you read it. She looked at her coffee. It was too hot to drink, and she needed something to do with her hands, so she just kept them around the mug. I haven't worked in finance, she said. I've been serving wine for 14 months. I know. I didn't finish my dissertation. I know that too. I don't have... She stopped. Started again. My father needs care. He has early-stage vascular dementia. He needs medication. He needs support. There are days when he can't be alone. I can't do something that requires 60-hour weeks and constant travel. And what I'm not offering you 60-hour weeks, Evan said. I'm offering you a job that has a salary and health insurance and a schedule that we can work around your situation. He paused. What are you paying for his medication? She blinked. That's not... What are you paying? $200 a month after insurance. Whitmore Freight's health plan covers dependents comprehensively. He said it the way you say a thing when you want it to be information and not charity, and she appreciated the distinction, even though her throat had done something complicated when he'd said it. She looked out the window of Rourke's, at the street, at the people walking past with their coffee and their dry-cleaned jackets and their lives that looked, from the outside, like they were going somewhere. What happened to your daughter? She said. He went still. She had read it months ago in a profile. Whitmore Freight's young gun, in some business magazine whose name she couldn't remember. It had been a short line, not the focus of the piece. He'd been married at 28, divorced at 31. There was a daughter, 3 years old, the piece had said. She's with me, Evan said. His voice had changed. It had gone quieter, the way his voice had gone quiet at the table the night before when he'd stopped asking and started saying. Full custody. Her mother. It was a mutual decision. It's better for everyone the way it is now. The way he said it's better for everyone made Clara certain it was not better for everyone, that it was just the best available option in a situation where there were no good options, which was a different thing entirely. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, you'll consider it. Or, okay, I'll take the meeting. With your team, the formal one. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug again. I'm not saying yes to anything before I understand what the job actually is. I need to know what I'd be doing, what the reporting structure is, what the parameters are. I need it in writing. She paused. And I need to be able to say no things. If I look at a deal and something is wrong, I need to be able to say it's wrong without... I need to know that's protected. Protected how? I need to know that if I tell you a deal is going to hurt people, you won't sign it anyway because you're tired. Something moved across his face. She wasn't sure what it was. It might have been embarrassment. It might have been respect. It might have been both at the same time, which she suspected was a thing that was possible. I can put that in the contract, he said. Then I'll take the meeting. He nodded. He picked up his coffee and drank it, and she could tell from his expression that it had gone cold, but he drank it anyway, which told her something about him that she filed away without quite deciding what to do with. One more thing, he said. She waited. Marcus Vale. He's not going to... He stopped. Started again. He called me this morning, before your text. He called me at 6:45 and he left a message, and the message was very calm and very controlled, and it was essentially a list of things he was going to do. What kind of things? Legal things. Financial pressure. He's still a minority shareholder, 11%. He can't block anything, but he can make noise. He can slow things down. He can create the kind of problems that cost money and attention. Evan set down the cup. He also said that he intended to pursue certain regulatory complaints against my company, which is, I don't know what he means by that. My lawyers are looking at it. Regulatory complaints about what? He didn't specify. Evan's jaw tightened briefly. That's the thing about Marcus. He never specifies. He implies. He suggests. He lets you construct the thing you're afraid of in your own imagination, and then he sits back and watches it grow. Clara thought about what she'd seen in his face the moment before he'd buttoned his jacket and walked out. The calculation behind it, the patience. He's going to come back, she said. Yes, whatever he does legally, whatever noise he makes, it's going to be the opening move, not the real one. Evan looked at her. Men like Marcus, she said carefully, don't lose gracefully. He walked out of that room last night looking exactly as controlled as he wanted to look. But the bourbon glass jumped when he stood up. Did you see that? Evan blinked. No. It jumped? Not much. But he stood up faster than he meant to. She paused. He's angry. He planned that deal very carefully, probably for a long time, and a waitress with fogged glasses and a Bic pen stopped it. He's going to want to correct that. The word correct landed in the space between them and sat there. I know, Evan said quietly. He was looking at her with that same expression he'd had at the table, the one she still couldn't entirely name. Which is part of why I want you in the room. She picked up her coffee. It was the right temperature now, finally. Set up the meeting, she said. The formal meeting happened 3 days later, on a Friday morning, on the 37th floor of a glass office building in Midtown, in a conference room that had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of a slice of Central Park that looked, from that height, like a child's drawing of a park. Clara wore the gray cardigan over a dark blouse and the shoes without the scuff. She had spent 2 evenings reviewing everything she could find publicly about Whitmore Freight, earnings reports, debt filings, freight volume data, the structure of their existing credit facilities. She had filled 12 pages of the moleskin with notes, and when she got to the conference room and found that there was a yellow legal pad at each seat, she kept the moleskin in her bag and used the legal pad instead, because she had decided on the train in that this was a room where she was going to be taken seriously or she wasn't going to stay, and arriving with a moleskin notebook from the drugstore would not help. There were 5 people in the room besides Evan. His general counsel, a compact woman named Patricia Reyes, who wore her hair in a knot and had the expression of someone who had seen every possible kind of problem and was prepared for all of them. 2 members of the risk team, both men, both younger than Clara had expected, both with the specific brand of surprised but trying not to show it energy that she had learned to recognize in rooms where she was not expected. A chief financial officer named Gordon Marsh, who was in his late 50s, who had been in freight finance for 20 years, and who shook her hand when she came in and then looked at the legal pad she was carrying and said nothing, though his face said something. And a woman named Sandra Keel, who was apparently the head of investor relations, who smiled warmly at Claire and said it was nice to meet her, and meant it, which was either a very good sign or not something Clara had enough information to interpret yet. Evan made the introductions quickly, the way he did everything, without preamble, without excess. He said, Clara Bennett, most of you have heard about Wednesday night. She's here because I think we need what she can do. Let's hear from Gordon first, then Clara, then we'll discuss. And he sat down. Gordon Marsh, it turned out, had an opinion about what had happened Wednesday night. He had several opinions. He expressed them with the directness of a man who had been in enough rooms to know that directness was its own kind of armor, and his opinions were, broadly, that the correlation issue was a real concern and had been flagged internally 3 weeks prior, that the way it had come to light was unusual to say the least, that the presence of an outside party in what was supposed to be a private negotiation raised certain confidentiality questions, and that while he wasn't suggesting anything improper had occurred, the company needed to be careful about how this situation was handled going forward. He did not say these things to Clara. He said them to Evan, but he said them in the tone of a person who is making sure that a third party in the room understands they have been heard. Clara let him finish. Then she said, The 2 additional inputs in the macro layer. Have your team found the third one? Gordon stopped. She opened her legal pad to the page she'd prepared the night before. The macro layer has 3 non-standard inputs in the mezzanine waterfall calculation. D47, which we identified Wednesday. I'd expect E62 and C89 to have the same issue. Those are the standard entry points in this model structure, but there's a third input that's less obvious. It's in the correlation matrix for the secondary recovery scenario, and it's built into a lookup table, not a direct cell. It looks like a reference, but it's actually a hard-coded value. She paused. If your team hasn't found it, they should look at row 114. Patricia Reyes wrote something on her legal pad. One of the risk team members, the younger one, the one who had been most visibly surprised when Clara walked in, looked at his colleague and then looked at the table. Gordon Marsh was looking at Clara directly now, for the first time. "How do you know there's a third input?" he said. "Because the model type is a Gould-Lerner structured waterfall. It has 3 standard non-standard entry points. It's in a 2016 paper that Gould published in the Journal of Structured Finance. The paper presented it as a theoretical framework. Apparently, it also became a practical one." Silence. Patricia Reyes said without looking up from her legal pad, "Do you have the citation for that paper? I have the DOI number, if that helps." She wrote it on a corner of her legal pad, tore it off, and slid it across the table. "My advisor at Chicago required us to annotate our reading lists. I annotated thoroughly." Evan, at the head of the table, was looking at his coffee cup. Gordon Marsh said, "Where did you complete your graduate work?" "University of Chicago. I didn't complete it." "Why not?" "Personal reasons," she said. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. He nodded once and wrote something on his own pad. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the end of it, Clara had, in a conversation she had not entirely planned, outlined for the risk team the full correction to the Northbridge model, identified the 3 misspecified inputs, estimated the revised default probability at 74.3% with a confidence interval she'd worked out the night before, and explained at Patricia Reyes's request exactly how she believed the Gould-Lerner framework had been used in the Newark pension case 6 years prior. She had not mentioned her father. At the end of the meeting, when the risk team and Sandra Keel had filed out, and Gordon Marsh had gathered his papers with the deliberate slowness of a man who was still deciding what he thought, Patricia Reyes stopped at the door and looked at Clara. "Row 114, she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Row 114, Clara said. Patricia Reyes looked at her for a moment longer. Then she left. Evan came around the table and stood near the window, with the slice of Central Park behind him and the light coming in over his shoulder. "Well," he said. "Gordon doesn't trust me," Clara said. "Gordon doesn't trust anyone he didn't hire." "That's reasonable." "He'll come around." Evan paused. "Probably." "Also reasonable." She capped her pen. "What did you think?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a cloud moved across the sun, and the slice of park went from bright to gray. "I think," he said, "that Marcus Vail made a significant mistake on Wednesday night. By trying to close the deal? By thinking the only person in the room worth watching was me." He looked at her steadily. He should have watched The Waitress. The offer letter came the following Monday. It was drafted by Patricia Reyes's office. Clean, precise, with no ambiguities, which Clara suspected was either Patricia being thorough or Patricia making a point, and possibly both at the same time. The title was Risk Assessment Specialist, which was accurate in the way that understatements are accurate. The salary was more than she'd made in 3 years of graduate school. The health coverage was comprehensive and included dependents, as Evan had said. There was also a clause in Section 4, Paragraph 3, that stated that the incumbent's risk assessment recommendations, once formally submitted, could not be overridden without a documented override process requiring board-level review. She read that paragraph 4 times. Then she signed the letter. She scanned it and sent it back. Then she sat at the kitchen table in the Bayonne apartment, with her coffee going cold beside her, and she thought about her father. She thought about walking into a room 3 days ago where she was not expected and saying what she saw. She thought about the formula in the cell, the numbers that had been green and were now red, the way the truth of a thing is always in there somewhere if you know what to ask. She thought about how she had spent 3 years trying not to use what she knew, because she was afraid of what knowing things could make you into. And she thought about how, in one night at table 4, she had used it anyway. Not to make money, not to be impressive, not to prove something, just because the alternative was watching something terrible happen to people who would never know it was coming. She picked up her phone and called her father's neurologist. She explained that she was starting a new job with new health coverage. She asked what the coverage change process looked like. The neurologist's receptionist said she would send over the paperwork. Clara said thank you and hung up. Then she went to her father's room and stood in the doorway. He was in the chair by the window, the one he sat in on the afternoons when he liked to watch the street below. He was watching a couple walking past with a dog. The dog was doing the thing dogs do when they smell something interesting on a hydrant. That complete, total commitment to the smell, as if nothing else in the world exists. "Dad?" He turned. "I got the job," she said. He looked at her for a moment. His face did the opening thing, the window lifting thing. "The man you told something to," he said. "Yes?" He listened. He listened. Her father turned back to the window. The couple and the dog had moved on. The street was just a street again, the way streets become just streets when there's nothing particular happening on them. "Your mother would have liked that," he said. Clara stood in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, with her hand on the doorframe and the afternoon light coming in over her father's shoulder, and she let that sit, the way you let certain things sit. Not because they don't matter, but because they matter too much for words to do them any service. Outside, on the street below, another dog was approaching the hydrant with the same absolute commitment. Her father watched it and smiled. Her first day at Whitmore Freight was a Tuesday in early May, and it rained, not the dramatic kind of rain from that night at the Sterling Room, just a gray, persistent drizzle that made the city look like it was being viewed through a dirty windshield. Clara had left early enough to catch the express train, which turned out to be delayed, so she ended up on the local anyway, standing near the door with her new work bag, a plain leather tote she'd bought at a department store on Saturday, which had cost more than she'd wanted to spend, but less than the ones the saleswoman had tried to show her, pressed against her side. The office was on the 37th floor. She'd been there once for the meeting with Gordon and the risk team, but arriving as an employee felt different than arriving as a guest. The elevator was full of people who all seemed to know where they were going. Clara stood near the back and watched the floor numbers climb and tried to remember what Patricia Reyes had said about where she was supposed to go first. Human Resources. 37th floor, East Wing, desk near the corner. She found it after 2 wrong turns. The HR coordinator was a woman in her 40s named Lynn, who had clearly processed 1,000 new hires, and who walked Clara through the paperwork with the efficient kindness of someone who knew that most people's brains stopped working when confronted with insurance enrollment forms. "You're adding a dependent," Lynn said, looking at the form Clara had filled out. "My father." "Okay, I'll need a copy of his information, birth certificate or social security card, proof of address if it's different from yours. You can email it, there's a secure portal." "He lives with me," Lynn made a note. "Even easier. The coverage starts 1st of the month, so June 1st. You'll get the insurance cards in the mail about 2 weeks before." She paused. "The plan's good, really good. I've worked a lot of places. This one's better than most." Clara nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything that wouldn't sound like the kind of gratitude that embarrassed both people involved. Lynn walked her to her office after the paperwork was done. It wasn't large, barely bigger than her bedroom in Bayonne, but it had a door that closed and a window that looked out at other windows and a desk that was empty except for a computer monitor, and a telephone and a yellow legal pad that someone had left there, exactly centered. "You're in the risk division," Lynn said, "which is technically under Gordon, but Patricia mentioned you report directly to Evan on certain projects. Is that right?" "I think so." "Okay. Well, Gordon's office is down the hall if you need anything operational. Evan's on 42. She paused. "He doesn't come down here much. So if he needs you, he'll call or email. Or sometimes he just shows up. Fair warning." Clara set her bag on the desk. "Got it." Lynn left, and Clara stood in the small office with the closed door and looked at the yellow legal pad for a long moment. Then she sat down and opened her computer and started reading. There was an email from Patricia Reyes waiting in her inbox, sent at 6:47 that morning. The subject line said, "Background reading." The body of the email said, "You'll want to familiarize yourself with these before 2 p.m. Attached were 6 PDF files, each between 40 and 90 pages, with names like Q1, underscore credit facility, underscore amendment and mezzanine, debt, underscore restructure, underscore proposal, underscore draft. 3. Clara opened the first one. By 11:30, she had read 4 of the 6 files and filled 8 pages of the legal pad with notes. By 1, she had read all 6 and had started cross-referencing them against the public debt filings she'd reviewed the week before. And she had found 3 things that didn't match. Not big things. Small things. A date discrepancy in one document, a reference to a credit facility amendment that wasn't in the public record. A footnote in the mezzanine proposal that cited a board resolution that Clara couldn't find anywhere else. Small things that might be nothing. Or might be the kind of nothing that turns into something if you pull on it. She made a separate page in the legal pad. She wrote, "Questions for 2 p.m. meeting." She listed the 3 discrepancies. Then she stared at the list and thought about Gordon Marsh's face in the conference room, the way he'd looked at her when she'd said she hadn't finished her dissertation. And she thought about whether showing up to her first real meeting with a list of things that might be problems was the right move, or the kind of move that would make Gordon decide she was looking for problems that weren't there. She was still thinking about it when someone knocked on her door. She looked up. Evan was standing in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking like he'd been awake since 5. "You found it," he said. "Lynn walked me over." "Good. How's the reading?" "Dense. Patricia doesn't believe in easing people in." He came in and leaned against the edge of her desk, not sitting, just resting there in the way people rest when they're not planning to stay long. "The 2 o'clock, it's the quarterly risk review. Normally it's Gordon's team presenting to the board. This time I want you there." "As what?" "As someone who's read the documents and can tell me if anything looks like Wednesday night." She glanced at the legal pad, at the list of 3 discrepancies she'd written. "I found some things." "Good things or bad things?" "I don't know yet." "Small things." "Small things that felt wrong?" She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady attention he had, the kind that made you feel like the answer you were about to give mattered more than you thought it did. "Yes," she said. "Then bring them to the meeting." He left before she could ask anything else. The 2 o'clock was in the same conference room where she'd had the formal interview. This time, there were more people. The full risk team, Gordon, Patricia, Sandra Keel from Investor Relations, and 3 members of the board that Clara didn't recognize, but who had the particular look of people who spent their professional lives in rooms where decisions were made. Evan sat at the head of the table. Clara sat 3 seats down, next to Patricia, with her legal pad open and her list of questions visible to anyone who cared to look. Gordon presented first. He had a slide deck, 30 slides, precise, methodical, covering credit exposure, operational risk, counterparty assessment, freight volume projections for Q2 and Q3. He spoke the way he'd spoken in the first meeting, with the directness of someone who knew his material and didn't need to oversell it. The board members asked clarifying questions. Gordon answered them. Everything moved smoothly. Then Evan said, "Gordon, the mezzanine restructure proposal. Walk me through the timeline again." Gordon clicked to a slide that showed a Gantt chart with color-coded phases. Board approval by end of May. Creditor negotiations in June. Close by mid-July, assuming no material objections from the secondary lenders. And the secondary lenders are 3 institutional, 1 pension fund. Clara's pen stopped moving. Evan looked at her. Just a glance, brief, not obvious to anyone who wasn't watching for it. "Which pension fund?" Evan said. Gordon checked his notes. "Tri-State Municipal. They're small, about 8% of the tranche, not a blocking position." "What's their liquidity situation?" "I'd have to check with Sandra." Sandra Keel looked up from her own notes. "I can pull the last quarterly filing." "Why?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at Clara, and this time it was obvious enough that one of the board members, a man in his 60s with the kind of tan that came from golf courses, not beaches, noticed and followed his gaze. "Miss Bennett," Evan said, "you had questions." It was not phrased as a question. It was phrased as a fact, which meant it was also phrased as an invitation, which meant Clara could either take it or spend the rest of the meeting sitting quietly while the men in the room made decisions about a pension fund that was 8% of a tranche in a restructure proposal that had a footnote she couldn't find anywhere else. She looked at her legal pad. "The mezzanine proposal," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She cleared her throat. The footnote on page 18. It references a board resolution from March 9th authorizing the company to enter negotiations with secondary lenders. I can't find that resolution in the public record. Gordon said, "It wouldn't be public. Board resolutions aren't required to be filed unless they're material to—" "It's material if it's authorizing debt restructure," Clara said. Silence. Patricia Reyes wrote something on her legal pad. Gordon looked at Clara, then at Evan. "The resolution exists. It was passed in a closed session. I can provide a copy if there's concern about—" "I'd like to see it," Clara said. Another silence. This one was shorter, but it had a different quality. Gordon's face had done something, not anger, but a kind of tightness around the mouth that suggested he was working to keep the anger out of his voice. "Miss Bennett," he said, and his tone was very even, very controlled. "I've been managing risk at this company for 6 years. The board resolution exists. It was reviewed by council. It was approved by this board." He gestured at the 3 board members. "If you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Clara said. "I'm asking to see a document that's referenced in a proposal I was asked to review. That's my job." The board member with the golf tan leaned forward slightly. "Evan, what exactly is Miss Bennett's role here?" "Risk assessment," Evan said. He had not moved. He was still sitting in the same position, his hands folded on the table in front of him, but something in his voice had changed. It had gotten quieter. "She reviews the structures we're considering and tells me if they're sound." "And you trust her assessment over Gordon's?" "I trust that she sees things Gordon's team isn't trained to see." "Such as?" "Such as," Clara said, before Evan could answer, "a pension fund in a secondary tranche with a restructure proposal that may put them at risk if the terms aren't actually what they appear to be." The board member looked at her. He had very blue eyes, the kind that were probably considered attractive in a different context, and in this context just looked cold. "And you believe the terms aren't what they appear to be," he said. "I believe I'd like to see the board resolution before I say they are." He sat back. He looked at Evan. Evan looked at Gordon. Gordon, after a moment that felt much longer than it probably was, said, "I'll have my assistant send it over." "Before close of business today," Evan said. "Before close of business today," Gordon repeated. The meeting continued. They moved on to other topics. Freight projections, fuel cost hedging, something about a new depot acquisition in Ohio. Clara took notes, but her hand was shaking slightly, and she kept having to stop and flex her fingers to make the shaking stop. By the time the meeting ended at 3:47, her legal pad had more scribbles than words. People filed out. The board members left first, talking quietly among themselves. Sandra Keel stopped to say something to Patricia. Gordon gathered his materials without looking at Clara, and then he left too. And the room was empty except for Clara and Evan and Patricia Reyes, who was still writing something in her extremely neat handwriting. "Well," Patricia said without looking up. "That was interesting." "Gordon's going to hate me now," Clara said. "Gordon hates everyone until they prove they're not stupid. You just accelerated the timeline." Patricia capped her pen. "The board resolution. I reviewed it in March. It exists, but you were right to ask." "Why?" "Because asking is your job." Patricia stood, picked up her legal pad and her phone and the folder she'd brought with her. "The pension fund footnote. I want you to look at that more carefully. Something about it bothered me when I read it the first time, but I couldn't place it. If you find something, email me directly." She left. Evan got up and closed the conference room door. Clara looked at him. "Did I just make this harder for you?" "You did your job." "That's not what I asked." He came back to the table and sat down, not at the head this time, but in the chair Patricia had vacated, next to Clara. He looked tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired from the Sterling room, just the regular kind, the kind that came from carrying too many things for too many consecutive days. "Gordon's good at what he does," Evan said. "He's been doing it for a long time and he knows freight risk inside and out, but what he's not good at is the thing you're good at. And he knows that now, and that's uncomfortable for him. And yes, that makes it harder for me in the short term." He paused. "But in the long term, it makes it safer." Which is the only term that actually matters. Clara looked at her legal pad, at the 3 questions she'd brought to the meeting, at the scribbles underneath where she'd been trying to keep her hand steady. "The pension fund," she said. Tri-State Municipal. If the restructure goes through the way it's proposed, and if the terms aren't actually what Gordon thinks they are, then we're doing to them what Marcus tried to do to us. She looked up at him. His face was very still. Which is why, he said quietly, you're going to find out if the terms are what Gordon thinks they are. And you're going to tell me. And if they're not, we're going to fix it before anyone signs anything. He stood up. The board resolution will be in your email by 5. I'll make sure of it. He left. Clara sat in the empty conference room for a moment, looking at the windows and the slice of gray sky visible between the other buildings, and she thought about her father in the courtroom in Newark and the man in the Navy suit who had said, very calmly, that what had been done was technically legal. Then she picked up her legal pad and went back to her office. The board resolution arrived at 4:53. It was a scanned PDF, 3 pages, signed by all 7 board members, dated March 9th. The language was dense, full of whereas clauses and be it resolved statements, but the substance was clear. The board authorized the executive team to enter negotiations with secondary lenders for the purpose of restructuring the mezzanine debt with specific parameters around interest rates, maturity extensions, and creditor consent thresholds. Clara read it twice. Then she opened the mezzanine proposal again and read footnote 18. The footnote said, pursuant to board resolution 2025-08, dated March 9th, 2025, authorizing mezzanine debt restructure negotiations with secondary lenders under terms specified in Appendix C. She opened Appendix C. Appendix C was 4 pages of term specifications, interest rate caps, maturity schedules, consent thresholds for creditor approval. It all matched what was in the board resolution, more or less. There were some minor differences in the technical language, but nothing that looked obviously wrong. But there was a sub-footnote at the bottom of page 2 of Appendix C. It was in 8-point font, easy to miss if you were reading quickly. It said, Recovery Waterfall applies standard industry correlation assumptions for freight-to-credit exposure per Moody's 2018 guidelines. Clara read that sentence 4 times. Then she opened a new browser window and looked up Moody's 2018 guidelines for freight-to-credit correlation. The guideline said 0.45. She sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled up the actual restructure model that was attached to the proposal as Exhibit D. She opened the correlation input table. She found the freight-to-credit correlation value, 0.38. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She looked at the screen again, just to be sure. 0.38. Not 0.45, which was what Moody's recommended and what the footnote said they were using. 0.38, which was lower, which was more optimistic, which meant the risk to the pension fund was being understated. Again. She picked up her phone. She started to call Evan, then stopped. She didn't have his direct number. She had his office number, which went through an assistant, and she wasn't sure if calling the office number at 5:15 on her first day was the right move. She opened her email instead. She typed, Found something in the mezzanine model. Can we talk? She hit send. The reply came in 30 seconds. Come up to 42. She took the elevator. Her hands were shaking again, worse than they'd been in the conference room, and she shoved them in her cardigan pocket so no one would see. The 42nd floor was quieter than 37. Fewer people. More closed doors. The assistant outside Evan's office, a man in his 30s with excellent posture and the look of someone who had been managing Evan's calendar for long enough to know which interruptions mattered, looked up when she approached. Clara Bennett, she said. He's expecting me. The assistant checked his screen, nodded, and gestured to the door. Go ahead. Evan's office was not large, which surprised her. She'd expected something impressive, something with a view and furniture that made a statement. Instead, it was a normal-sized office with a desk that looked used, a bookshelf full of actual books, and a window that looked out at the same gray sky everyone else's window looked out at. There was a framed photo on the desk, a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with dark hair and Evan's eyes. Evan was standing at the window when Clara came in. He turned. 0.38, she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He just waited. The correlation assumption in the restructure model, it's 0.38. The footnote says they're using Moody's 2018 guidelines, which is 0.45. Someone changed it, or someone wrote the footnote after the model was built and didn't check that they matched. Evan was very quiet. It's the same thing Marcus did, Clara said. Not as extreme, but the same principle. Lower the correlation assumption, make the risk look smaller, make the deal look safer for the senior positions. She paused. The pension fund is in the mezzanine. If the actual correlation is 0.45 and the model is using 0.38, the pension fund's recovery rate is overstated by, she did the math in her head, probably 15 to 20%. Do you think Gordon knows? I don't know. Maybe? Maybe he just trusted whoever built the model. She hesitated. Or maybe he knows and he thinks 0.38 is reasonable and I'm being paranoid because of what happened with Marcus. Are you being paranoid? She looked at him. No, she said. He nodded. He turned back to the window for a moment and she could see his reflection in the glass, the tired lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set. I'm going to call an emergency board meeting, he said, tomorrow. We're going to pull the proposal until the correlation assumption is corrected and the model is rerun with the right inputs. He turned around. And you're going to present the findings. Her stomach dropped. Evan, I've been here for 1 day. I know. Gordon should present it. Or Patricia. They have credibility with the board. I interrupted a meeting and asked for a document and made everyone uncomfortable. You did your job, he said again. And tomorrow, you're going to do it again. He came around the desk and leaned against it, the same way he'd leaned against her desk that morning. Clara, I hired you because you see what other people miss. That only works if you're in the room when the decisions are being made. You can't do that from the back of the queue. What if I'm wrong? Then we fix it and move on. But you're not wrong. He said it with a certainty that she didn't feel, and that made her want to both believe him and argue with him at the same time. Go home. Get some sleep. I'll send the board meeting invite tonight. She left his office feeling like she'd just stepped off a train that was still moving. The emergency board meeting happened at 9 the next morning. Clara had not slept well. She'd gone home to Bayonne, made dinner for her father, sat with him through the nature documentary he liked, and then she'd lain in bed staring at the ceiling and running through the presentation she was going to give over and over, like a script she couldn't quite memorize. She got to the office at 7:45. She printed out the key pages of the model. She made notes on her legal pad. She went through the correlation data 3 more times, just to be absolutely sure. At 8:55, Patricia Reyes appeared in her doorway. Ready? Patricia said. No. Good. People who say they're ready are usually overconfident. She came in and looked at the papers Clara had spread across her desk. Gordon's going to push back. He'll say 0.38 is within industry tolerance. He'll say you're applying an overly conservative standard. He'll make it sound like you're the problem. What should I say? Say what you know. Say it clearly. Don't apologize for it. Patricia paused. And if he tries to make you sound hysterical or paranoid, remind him that you caught Marcus Vail with fogged glasses in 30 seconds. That usually shuts people up. Clara almost smiled. They walked to the conference room together. The board was already there. All 7 members this time, not just the 3 from yesterday. Gordon was there, sitting very straight in his chair, with a folder in front of him and an expression that was carefully neutral. Sandra Keel was there. 2 members of the legal team Clara hadn't met. And Evan at the head of the table, looking like he'd been awake since 5 and had already made 6 decisions before breakfast. Clara sat down next to Patricia. Evan started the meeting without preamble. We're here because Clara identified a discrepancy in the mezzanine restructure proposal. Gordon, I want to hear your position first. Then Clara will present her findings. Then we'll decide how to proceed. Gordon opened his folder. He spoke in the same even, methodical tone he always used. He explained that the correlation assumption of 0.38 was within the acceptable range used by comparable firms in comparable restructures. He explained that Moody's guidelines were recommendations, not requirements. He explained that the model had been reviewed by his team and by external counsel and had been found to be sound. He explained that while he respected Clara's diligence, he believed her concerns were based on an overly conservative interpretation of industry standards that, if applied across the company's entire debt portfolio, would make most of their existing structures appear higher risk than they actually were. He said all of this calmly, professionally, without a trace of hostility. And when he was done, one of the board members, A woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that Clara associated with people who asked hard questions, said, "Miss Bennett, your response." Clara opened her legal pad. She had prepared a whole speech. She had written it out the night before, sitting at her kitchen table, trying to find the right words that would make the board understand without making Gordon look incompetent. Because she had realized somewhere around midnight that this was not just about the math. It was about whether the board was going to trust her, or trust the man who had been doing this job for 6 years. But now, sitting in the room, with all 7 board members watching her and Gordon's carefully neutral expression and Evan's steady gray-green eyes, she realized that the speech she'd prepared was too careful, too apologetic, too much like the voice she'd used when she'd been serving wine. So she set the speech aside. "0.38 is wrong," she said. The room went quiet. It's not a question of industry tolerance or conservative standards, it's wrong. Freight to credit correlation in a downturn runs between 0.7 and 0.9. Moody's says 0.45 because they're averaging across market conditions, including good years. But if you're modeling risk, if you're asking what happens when things go bad, you don't use the average. You use the bad case scenario, because that's when risk matters. She paused. 0.38 is the number you use when you want the deal to look safe. 0.7 is the number you use when you want to know if it actually is safe. The board member with the gray hair leaned forward. And if we use 0.7, the pension fund's recovery rate drops from 82% to 68%. Someone at the table made a small noise. Clara wasn't sure who. "That's a 14-point gap," the board member said. "Yes." "Which means the pension fund is being told they'll recover 82 cents on the dollar when the realistic expectation is 68. "Yes," Gordon said. "That's assuming a downturn scenario." "We're always assuming a downturn scenario," Clara said. She didn't raise her voice. She just said it the way you say a thing that's true and doesn't need emphasis. That's what risk modeling is. We don't model for when things go well. We model for when they don't. The board member with the gray hair looked at Evan. "This is the same issue you had with the Vail deal." "Yes," Evan said. "So either we have a systemic problem with how our models are being built, or we've had 2 consecutive instances of the same error by coincidence." "I don't believe in that kind of coincidence," Evan said. Gordon's face had gone very still. "Are you suggesting my team deliberately—" "I'm not suggesting anything about intent," Evan said. "I'm saying we have a pattern, and patterns don't happen by accident." The board was quiet for a long moment. Then the woman with the gray hair said, "Pull the proposal. Rerun the model with 0.7 correlation. If the pension fund's recovery rate falls below 70%, we renegotiate the terms before we proceed." She looked at Gordon. "And I want an audit of every model your team has built in the last 2 years. External audit, retained by the board, not by management." Gordon's jaw tightened. "That's non-negotiable," the woman said. She looked at Evan. "Make it happen." Evan nodded. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. The board filed out, talking quietly among themselves. Sandra Keel stopped to ask Clara something about timing, and Clara answered. And then Sandra left too, and the room was empty except for Clara and Gordon and Patricia, who was still writing something in her extremely neat handwriting. Gordon stood up. He gathered his folder. He looked at Clara for a long moment. "You're making enemies," he said quietly. "I'm doing my job. Those are the same thing in this building." He left. Patricia capped her pen. She looked at Clara. "He's not wrong," Patricia said, "but he's also not right." She stood up, picked up her legal pad. "You did well. The board respects precision. You gave them precision." She paused at the door. "The audit is going to take 3 weeks, maybe 4. During that time, Gordon's going to be extremely careful about everything his team produces, which is good for the company and uncomfortable for you. Can you handle that?" "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "Good answer." Patricia left. Clara sat alone in the conference room for a moment, looking at the empty chairs and the table and the windows with their view of gray sky and other buildings. Then she picked up her legal pad and went back to her office, and she thought about what Gordon had said. "You're making enemies." She thought about Marcus Vail buttoning his jacket. She thought about the bourbon glass jumping when he stood up. She thought about the fact that it had been 3 weeks since the Sterling room, and Marcus had been very quiet, and men like Marcus were never quiet unless they were planning something. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evan. You were right. Thank you. Also, we need to talk about Marcus. Not today. Soon. She read it twice. Then she put the phone down and went back to work, because there were still 3 more documents Patricia had sent her to read, and because the pension fund audit was going to require someone to review 2 years of models, and because she had a feeling that the someone was going to be her. Outside her window, the rain had finally stopped. The city looked clean in the way cities look after rain. Sharper, more defined, like someone had turned up the contrast. Clara opened the next document and started reading. Marcus made his move 6 weeks later, on a Thursday in mid-June, at exactly the moment when Clara had almost convinced herself he wasn't going to make one at all. She was in her office, 3 floors down from Evan, working through the 7th week of the model audit that the board had ordered. The audit was tedious in the way that important things are often tedious. Hours of comparing cell formulas against documentation, checking correlation assumptions against historical data, looking for the small inconsistencies that meant something had been changed deliberately or something had been missed accidentally. She'd found 4 more instances of misspecified inputs across Gordon's models from the past 2 years. None as dramatic as the Northbridge deal, but all of them pushing in the same direction. Lower risk, safer appearance, better-looking terms for whoever was holding the senior position. Gordon had stopped speaking to her entirely after the 3rd finding. He didn't ignore her in meetings. He was too professional for that. But he answered her questions with exactly the number of words required and nothing more. And when she passed him in the hallway, he looked at a point slightly to the left of her head, as if she were a piece of furniture he was navigating around. Patricia said this was normal. Patricia said Gordon would either come around or he wouldn't. And either way, Clara's job was to keep doing the work. So she kept doing the work. She was looking at a freight volume projection model from March 2024 when her desk phone rang. The internal line. She picked it up. Clara Bennett. It's Evan. Can you come up? Something in his voice made her stand up before she'd consciously decided to. Now? Now. She took the elevator. The assistant outside Evan's office waved her through without the usual check of his screen, which meant Evan had told him she was coming, which meant this had been planned at least a few minutes in advance, which meant it wasn't an emergency, but it was something. Evan was at his desk. Patricia was standing near the window. And there was a 3rd person in the room, a man Clara didn't recognize, mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of calm expression that lawyers have when they're about to explain something complicated. Clara, this is Michael Taverner, Evan said. Outside counsel. He specializes in securities litigation. Clara shook Taverner's hand. His grip was brief, professional, forgettable. What happened? She said. Marcus filed suit this morning, Patricia said. She had a folder in her hands, thin, maybe 20 pages. Against the company and against Evan personally. Breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference with prospective business advantage, and defamation. Clara sat down in the chair across from Evan's desk without meaning to. Defamation? He's claiming, Taverner said, that statements made by company representatives regarding the Northbridge deal, specifically statements suggesting that the deal structure was deliberately designed to obscure risk, constituted defamatory falsehoods that damaged his professional reputation and resulted in the loss of business opportunities. Clara's mouth was very dry. What statements? He doesn't specify in the complaint, but the filing references conversations that took place at the Sterling Room on April 23rd. Taverner paused. You were present for those conversations. She looked at Evan. He was watching her with the same steady expression he'd had in the conference room the day she'd presented the mezzanine findings. The expression that said, I know this is hard, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. He's trying to scare you, Evan said. Is it working? Clara said. Is it? She thought about that. She thought about the Sterling Room and the way Marcus had looked at her when he'd said, Honey, I don't know what you think you saw. She thought about the bourbon glass jumping. She thought about her father on the couch and the man in the navy suit in Newark. No, she said. Taverner opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. The suit is mostly noise. The breach of fiduciary claim won't survive summary judgment. Marcus was never owed a fiduciary duty. He was a prospective business partner. The tortious interference claim is weak, but the defamation piece is where he's going to make trouble. How? Claire said. Discovery. If he can get past the initial motion to dismiss, he'll use discovery to request internal documents, emails, meeting notes. He'll depose you, Evan, Patricia, probably Gordon, and the risk team. He'll try to find anything that looks like the company made statements about his business practices that weren't factually supported. Taverner set the document on Evan's desk. And if he finds those statements, he'll use them to create leverage for a settlement. He doesn't want money, Evan said quietly. He wants the 11%. Patricia looked at him. Explain. He's still a minority shareholder, 11%. He can't block major decisions, but he can vote against them. He can create friction. He can make my life difficult at every board meeting for the next 5 years. Evan leaned back in his chair. But if he files a lawsuit and ties us up in litigation for 18 months, 2 years, and then offers to drop everything in exchange for me buying out his shares at, 20% over market, he walks away clean with a profit, and I'm rid of him. That's extortion, Clara said. That's negotiation, Taverner said. Expensive, unpleasant, but legal. Clara looked at the document on Evan's desk. The caption across the top said, Marcus Vail versus Whitmore Freight Holdings, et al. She couldn't see the rest from where she was sitting, but she could see enough to know that et al. Probably meant Evan individually, which meant Marcus was trying to make this personal, which meant he was trying to hurt Evan in a way that went beyond business. What do we do? She said. Taverner looked at Evan. Evan looked at Patricia. Patricia said, We defend aggressively. We file a motion to dismiss. We argue that every statement made about the Northbridge deal was factually accurate, and we make Marcus prove otherwise. She paused. But there's another option. Which is? Evan said. We investigate him first. The room went quiet. Marcus has been doing this for 30 years, Patricia said. Structured deals, leveraged buyouts, debt restructures. He's good at it. Too good. Which means he's either the luckiest investor in New York or he's been using the same playbook for a very long time. She looked at Clara. You said the Gould-Lerner framework was used in the Newark pension case. That was 6 years ago. How many other cases have there been? Clara thought about her notebook. The list of 11 entries. The conversation she'd overheard at the Sterling room that had made her go home and check the math. I don't know, she said. But I could find out. Taverner shook his head. If you're thinking about building a counterclaim based on a pattern of misconduct, you need to be very careful. Discovery goes both ways. Anything you find, Marcus's team gets to see. If you can't prove a pattern definitively, you're just handing him ammunition. What if we don't build a counterclaim? Clara said slowly. What if we just find the deals, document them, and then make sure the right people know they exist? Patricia's eyes narrowed. Define the right people. Regulators, pension fund trustees, the institutional investors who are sitting in the secondary tranches of his other deals wondering if they're about to be the next Northbridge. Clara looked at Evan. You said Marcus doesn't lose gracefully. He's suing you because you embarrassed him. But if we show that Northbridge wasn't a one-time mistake, if we show it's how he operates, we don't just defend against his lawsuit. We end him. Taverner set down his briefcase. Miss Bennett, with respect, what you're describing is a coordinated campaign to damage a litigant's business relationships while you're being sued by that litigant. That is exceptionally dangerous territory. Only if the information we're sharing is false, Clara said. Is it false? We don't know yet, Patricia said, which is the problem. Then let me find out. Clara looked at all three of them. Give me 2 weeks. I'll pull every deal Marcus has closed in the past 5 years. I'll run the models, check the correlation assumptions, look for the same patterns we found in Northbridge. If I find them, we take it to the board. If I don't, we defend the lawsuit the normal way, and I'll sit for a deposition and tell the truth about what I saw. Evan was quiet for a long moment. He had his hands folded on the desk again, and he was looking at them, not at Clara, and she couldn't tell what he was thinking. 2 weeks, he said finally. But you're not doing it alone. Patricia, assign someone from legal to help her. Someone junior enough that they have time, senior enough that they know what they're looking for. He looked up at Clara. And if you find something, we don't go public with it. We bring it to the board first. I'm not using this company to fight a personal war with Marcus Vail unless the board agrees it's the right move. Clara nodded. Taverner looked deeply unhappy, but he didn't argue. He gathered his briefcase and his documents and said he'd be in touch about the motion to dismiss, and then he left. Patricia said, "I'll have someone on your floor by Monday." And she left too. And then it was just Clara and Evan in the office, with the afternoon light coming through the window and the framed photo of the little girl on the desk between them. "You don't have to do this," Evan said. "Yes, I do." "Why?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about her father in Newark and the Sterling room and the feeling of standing at table 4 with her hands shaking and her voice too small and saying the thing anyway because the alternative was worse. "Because I know what happens when people like Marcus win," she said, "and I'm tired of watching it." Evan nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's make sure he doesn't." The legal associate Patricia assigned was a woman named Rachel Eng, 28 years old, 3 years out of Columbia Law, who showed up in Clara's office on Monday morning with a laptop and a coffee and an expression that suggested she had not slept well but was determined not to let it show. "Patricia says you need help pulling deal documents," Rachel said, "for Marcus Vail. All deals closed in the past 5 years." "Yes, that's going to be a lot of documents." "I know. Do you have a list of the deals, or are we starting from scratch?" Clara pulled out her notebook, the small black moleskin. She opened it to a page near the back where she'd started a new list 3 days ago, after the meeting in Evan's office. She'd found 7 deals so far, just from public SEC filings and news archives. 7 deals where Marcus's firm had been involved in a restructure or recapitalization of a freighter logistics company in the past 5 years. She slid the notebook across the desk. Rachel looked at it, then she looked at Clara. "You keep a handwritten list." "Old habit. From graduate school?" "From being afraid I'd lose the digital version." Clara paused. "Also, writing it down makes it real in a way that typing doesn't." Rachel nodded slowly. She took out her own laptop and opened a spreadsheet. "Okay, let's make it really real." They worked for 12 days straight. Not all day, every day. Clara still had the audit to finish, and Rachel had her normal caseload. But every morning at 7, before the rest of the office arrived, Rachel would appear in Clara's doorway with coffee, and they would work until 9, and then again in the evenings after most people had left. They pulled SEC filings, credit agreements, offering memoranda. They tracked down the model structures, the correlation assumptions, the recovery waterfalls. They built a spreadsheet that had 23 columns and, by the end of the first week, 42 rows. 42 deals. In 5 years. Not all of them were bad. Some were clean. Some used reasonable assumptions, transparent structures, industry-standard correlation values. But 16 of them weren't. 16 deals where the correlation assumption was too low, where the recovery waterfall was hiding risk, where the pension funds and municipal investors and institutional holders of the secondary tranches were being told they'd recover 85 cents on the dollar when the realistic number was 60, 65 if they were lucky. 16 deals. Across 8 different companies, $300 million in total exposure to pension funds alone. Clara sat in her office on the 11th night at 9:47 looking at the spreadsheet, and she felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't quite anger, it was something colder than anger, something that had more patience in it. "This is enough," Rachel said quietly. She was sitting across from Clara, her laptop open, her coffee long since gone cold. "This is more than enough to take to the board. Is it enough for the regulators?" Rachel hesitated. "I'm not a securities litigator, but yes, I think so. If even half of these deals are as bad as they look, the SEC is going to want to know about it." Clara closed her laptop. She looked at Rachel, this woman who had spent 12 days helping a person she barely knew dig through documents that could, if this went wrong, end both of their careers. "Why did Patricia assign you?" Clara said. Rachel smiled very slightly. "Because I asked her to." "Why?" "Because the first job I had out of law school was at a firm that defended pension funds. I saw what happens when the models are wrong. I saw the people who lose their retirements because someone wanted the deal to close and didn't want to ask hard questions." She paused. "So when Patricia said she needed someone to help you find out if Marcus Vail had been doing this to other people, I wanted to be in the room." Clara nodded. She understood that. She understood it completely. They presented the findings to the board on a Friday morning. All 7 members were there, plus Evan, Patricia, Gordon, who had been told about the investigation 2 days prior and who had not said a single word to Clara since. and Michael Taverner, who looked like a man who had lost an argument he'd been having for 2 weeks. Clara presented. Rachel sat next to her, ready to answer technical questions, but Clara did most of the talking. She walked them through the methodology, the data sources, the 16 deals they'd identified. She showed them the correlation assumptions, the recovery rates, the total exposure to pension funds. She kept her voice even, factual, the way she'd learned to do in graduate school when she was presenting research and needed to separate the findings from the emotions. When she was done, the board was very quiet. The woman with the short gray hair, her name was Elizabeth Greer, Clara had learned, and she'd been on the board for 9 years, leaned forward. "Miss Bennett," Greer said, "these findings, you're confident in them?" "Yes." "Confident enough to take them to the SEC?" Clara glanced at Taverner. Taverner's expression said, "Please don't say yes." "I'm confident the deals are structured the way I've described," Clara said carefully. "Whether that rises to the level of securities fraud is a legal question I'm not qualified to answer." "Michael?" Greer looked at Taverner. Taverner took a breath. "If these findings are accurate, and I have no reason to believe they're not, then yes, there's a strong argument that Vail Strategic has engaged in a pattern of material misrepresentation to investors. Whether the SEC pursues it is a different question, but we have an obligation to report it." Another board member, a man in his 60s who Clara didn't know, said, "And if we report it, Marcus will know it came from us." "Yes," Taverner said, "which means the lawsuit gets worse." "Probably, in the short term." Taverner paused. "In the long term, if the SEC opens an investigation, Marcus's litigation position collapses. You can't sue someone for defamation when the statements you're claiming are defamatory turn out to be true." Greer looked at Evan. "This is your call." Evan had been quiet through the entire presentation. He'd sat at the end of the table, listening, not interrupting, and Clara had not been able to read his face. Now he looked at the spreadsheet Clara had printed, the 42 rows, the 16 deals highlighted in yellow. "I want to talk to the pension funds first," he said. The room went still. "Excuse me?" Greer said. "The pension funds, the ones sitting in the secondary tranches of these 16 deals. I want to reach out to them directly, show them what we found, and give them the option to take it to their own regulators." Evan looked at Clara. "These are real people. Teachers, municipal workers, firefighters. They're the ones who are going to lose everything if these deals collapse. They should know before the SEC does. They should have the chance to protect themselves." Taverner said, "Evan, that is an extraordinarily risky." "I know what it is, Michael." Evan's voice was quiet, but it had that quality it got when he was done listening to objections. "I also know what it isn't. It isn't hiding behind lawyers while other people's retirements disappear. We found this. We tell them. They decide what to do with it." Greer looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the rest of the board. "All in favor of authorizing management to contact the affected pension funds with the findings from this investigation," she said. 6 hands went up. Gordon's hand stayed down. He was looking at the table, his jaw tight, and Clara realized that he had known this moment was coming and had not been able to stop it. "Motion passes," Greer said. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Taverner, work with Patricia to draft the communications. I want them reviewed by outside counsel before anything goes out." She stood up. "And Clara?" Clara looked up. "Good work," Greer said. The pension fund notifications went out on a Monday in early July. 16 letters sent by overnight courier to 16 different pension fund administrators, each one containing a summary of the findings, the supporting documentation, and a very carefully worded suggestion that the fund's fiduciary counsel might want to review the correlation assumptions in their respective deals. By Wednesday, 3 of the funds had called their lawyers. By Friday, 5 more had opened internal investigations. By the following Tuesday, the SEC had received formal complaints from 4 separate pension funds regarding Vail Strategic's deal structures, and Marcus Vail's lawsuit against Whitmore Freight had been quietly amended to remove the defamation claim. Taverner called it a strategic retreat. Patricia called it the beginning of the end. Clara called it what it was, Marcus realizing he'd walked into a fight he couldn't win. The formal end came 6 weeks later, in August, on a morning so hot that the air conditioning in the office building couldn't quite keep up, and everyone walked around with their jackets off and their sleeves rolled. Patricia knocked on Clara's door at 10:15. Marcus's lawyers called, Patricia said. They're offering a settlement. Clara set down her pen. What kind of settlement? He drops the lawsuits entirely. No admission of wrongdoing on either side. In exchange, Evan agrees to buy out his 11% at current market value. No premium. Patricia paused. And Marcus agrees to never do business with any Whitmore entity again, in any capacity for any reason. That's not a settlement, Clara said. That's surrender. Yes, Patricia said. It is. Clara thought about the Sterling room, about Marcus buttoning his jacket, about the bourbon glass jumping. Does Evan want to take it? She said. Evan wants to know what you think. Clara looked at the papers on her desk. The audit was finished. The 16 deals were now the subject of 4 separate regulatory investigations. Gordon's team had been restructured, with new oversight protocols and a requirement that all correlation assumptions be reviewed by an independent third party before any deal closed. The company was cleaner than it had been, safer. But Marcus was still out there. I think, Clara said slowly, that if we take the settlement, Marcus walks away with $100 million and no consequences except that he can't do business with us specifically. He'll go somewhere else. He'll find new investors who don't know about Northbridge. He'll build the same models with the same assumptions and hurt the same kind of people. Probably, Patricia said. But if we don't take it, if we let the SEC finish their investigation, if we let the pension funds file their lawsuits, if we make this public, Marcus doesn't walk away. Marcus ends. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's not our fight, Clara. Our fight was Northbridge. We won. The rest of it is up to the regulators and the pension funds and the people whose job it is to police this industry. And if they don't, then they don't. Patricia sat down in the chair across from Clara's desk. I know what you want this to be. I know you want it to be the thing that fixes all of it, that punishes everyone who's ever done this and protects everyone who might be hurt in the future. But it doesn't work that way. You can't save everyone. You can only save the people in front of you. Clara looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. We should take the settlement, she said. Patricia nodded. I'll tell Evan. She left. Clara sat in her office for a long time, looking at the window, at the other buildings, at the sky that was bright and cloudless in the way August skies are when the heat has burned everything clean. Patricia was right. They couldn't save everyone. But they had saved the people at Whitmore Freight. They had saved the pension fund in the mezzanine restructure. They had given 16 other pension funds the information they needed to protect themselves. That had to be enough. It had to be. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. Marcus Vail sold his shares, dropped the lawsuit, and disappeared from Whitmore Freight's world as completely as if he'd never been there. The SEC investigation continued without the company's involvement. 2 of the pension funds filed civil suits. Clara heard, through Rachel, that one of the suits had settled and the other was headed for trial. She didn't follow it too closely. She had her own work to do. In September, Evan promoted her. The new title was Vice President of Risk Assessment, which came with a significant raise in an office on the 42nd floor, 2 doors down from Evan's. Gordon congratulated her in the break room, very formally, and then said, I still think you're too conservative in your assumptions. I know, Clara said, but you were right about Northbridge, and the mezzanine proposal, and the audit. He paused. So I'm going to try being too conservative for a while, see how it feels. It was, Clara thought, as close to an apology as Gordon was capable of giving. She took it. October came, and with it the kind of cool, bright weather that made New York feel like the best version of itself. Clara's father had a good month, more good days than bad, longer stretches where he remembered things without prompting, evenings where they could sit and watch the documentaries, and he would tell her stories about when she was small, that she'd heard before but didn't mind hearing again. His medication was covered now, fully. The new insurance had kicked in, and the $200 monthly expense had disappeared, and Clara had been able to move him to a better neurologist who'd adjusted his prescription and added a new medication that seemed to help with the confusion. On a Saturday in late October, Clara took him to the park. They walked slowly, because he walked slowly now, and they sat on a bench near a pond where ducks were doing the thing ducks do, paddling in circles, occasionally diving for something, coming back up, looking pleased with themselves. You're different, her father said. She looked at him. Different how? Taller. She smiled. I'm the same height I've been since I was 16, Dad. Not that kind of taller. He watched the ducks for a moment. You stand up straighter. You look people in the eye more. You stopped apologizing when you talk. She thought about that. She thought about the Sterling room and table 4 and the way her voice had been too small and how she'd said the thing anyway. I stopped being afraid, she said. Of what? Of being the smartest person in the room. Her father nodded slowly. Your mother always said that was the thing you needed to learn. That being smart wasn't something to be sorry about. He paused. I think she'd be proud of you. What you did. Helping all those people. Clara's throat did something complicated. She looked at the ducks instead of at her father, because looking at her father was going to make her cry. And she didn't want to cry in the park on a Saturday in October when the weather was perfect and her father was having a good day. Thanks, Dad, she said. They sat for a while longer, watching the ducks, not talking, just being there together in the way that families are sometimes, when words would just get in the way. When Clara went back to work on Monday, there was an envelope on her desk. Plain manila, no return address, her name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page printed on expensive stationery. At the top was an embossed logo, Sterling Room Members Club. The letter said, Dear Miss Bennett, we are writing to inform you that your membership application to the Sterling Room has been approved by the membership committee. Your sponsor, Mr. Evan Whitmore, has covered the initiation fee and the first year of dues. We look forward to welcoming you as a member. Please contact our membership office at your earliest convenience to schedule your orientation. Sincerely, Harrison Polk, Membership Director. Clara read it twice. Then she walked down the hall to Evan's office. His assistant waved her in. Evan was on the phone. He held up one finger. 1 minute, and Clara waited by the door until he finished. I didn't ask for this, she said, holding up the letter. I know. I can't afford it. You don't have to. It's covered. Evan, Clara. He set down his phone. You stood at a table in that club and saved my company and 3,000 jobs. The least I can do is make sure you can sit at any table you want. He paused. You don't have to use it. But if you ever want to have a meeting there or take your father to dinner or just sit in a room where people used to ignore you and know they can't anymore, you can. She looked at the letter again, at her name, written in someone else's handwriting, on paper that cost more per sheet than she used to spend on groceries in a week. She thought about Donovan, about the way he used to snap his fingers near her ear, about how he'd told her never to interrupt, never to make conversation, never to do anything except pour and smile and walk away. She wondered if he still worked there. She wondered if he'd be surprised to see her walk in as a member. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. She went back to her office. She set the letter on her desk, next to her computer and her coffee and the small black moleskin notebook that she still carried, even though she didn't need to hide it anymore. She opened the notebook to the back, to the list she'd started keeping 14 months ago. The list of deals she'd overheard that she was certain were going to fall apart. Entry 12 was Northbridge. She'd never written anything next to it. She picked up her pen. Next to entry 12, she wrote, Stopped. Then she closed the notebook and got back to work. There were models to review, deals to assess, correlation assumptions to check. There were people whose retirements depended on someone in a room looking at the numbers and saying when they were wrong. There were pension funds and municipal workers and teachers and firefighters who would never know Clara's name, would never know that a woman in an office on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown had spent 12 days digging through spreadsheets to make sure they didn't lose everything. That was fine. Clara had learned, somewhere in the space between the Sterling Room and this moment, that the most important work was often the work nobody saw. The quiet work. The work of looking at a formula and seeing what it was hiding. The work of speaking up when speaking up was hard. The work of being the smartest person in the room and not apologizing for it. Outside her window, the October light was starting to fade. The city was settling into evening, into the rhythm of people going home, to families and dinners and documentaries about ducks. Clara had another hour of work before she'd catch the train back to Bayonne, back to the apartment where her father was probably sitting in his chair by the window, watching the street below. Maybe having a good day, maybe not. But whatever kind of day it would be a day where his medication was covered, where the bills were paid, where his daughter had a job that mattered and a title that meant something and the kind of future that neither of them had been sure was possible 6 months ago. She picked up the next file and started reading. Somewhere in Manhattan, in a club on the 42nd floor with burgundy carpet and real logs in the fireplace, the members were gathering for dinner. Somewhere in that room, someone was probably making a deal that was structured just a little bit wrong, with correlation assumptions that were just a little bit too optimistic, with recovery rates that would look good on paper until they didn't. Clara couldn't stop all of them, but she could stop the ones in front of her, and that, she had learned, was enough.